Hey guys, tonight we're heading into the cold, rain-soaked mountains of 1940, where an empire tried to prove its greatness and found only mud, frostbite, and humiliation. You're standing there, yes, you, in a soaked wool uniform that smells like wet goat, clutching a rifle that jams when it's cold enough to make your eyelashes freeze. This isn't North Africa, and it sure isn't the Roman revival Mussolini promised. It's the rugged borderlands of Greece. And you're about to learn why ambition and arrogance can die just as easily as a man lost in a snowstorm. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, post your location and local time in the comments. I always love seeing where my night owls are tuning in from. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. It starts in the autumn of 1940, when Benito Mussolini, Il Duce, the self-proclaimed heir of Caesar, can't stand being upstaged by his ally Adolf Hitler any longer. Germany's storming across Europe, taking Poland, France, the Low Countries, and Italy? Italy's sitting in North Africa, barely holding on to the scraps of empire it already owned. Mussolini can't bear it. He needs his own lightning war, his own conquest to brag about in the cafes of Rome. And what better target, he thinks, than Greece, a small, mountainous kingdom just across the Adriatic, ripe for liberation. The reasoning is absurdly simple, and that's part of the problem. Greece, Mussolini tells his generals, will be Italy's quick victory, a modern echo of ancient Rome taming unruly Balkan tribes. 3 weeks, he boasts to his mistress Claretta Petacci, and we'll be in Athens. Historians still argue whether Mussolini actually believed this or was bluffing to maintain his image as Hitler's equal. But either way, it shows how delusion can masquerade as strategy. At this point, Italy's military is stretched thin. Its soldiers are brave enough, but the equipment? Oh, the equipment. Feels like something out of World War I. Bolt-action rifles, artillery that still uses horse-drawn limbers, trucks that stall on inclines. The Army's modernization programs exist mostly on paper. Factories can't keep up with the fantasies of fascist propaganda reels. But no one wants to tell Mussolini that. Not Pietro Badoglio, his seasoned yet weary chief of the general staff, who's already learned that disagreeing with the Duce is a career-ending move. So in early October 1940, Mussolini summons Badoglio to his office. "Prepare for the invasion of Greece," he orders. Badoglio blinks. The weather is turning. The Balkan rains have already begun. Albanian roads, the ones Italy would have to use as a launch point, are little more than rocky goat paths. "Signore," Badoglio says carefully. "The terrain," but Mussolini waves him off. "We conquered Ethiopia, didn't we? This will be child's play." Somewhere in the back of his mind, Badoglio knows this is madness. Yet he nods. A mix of fear, pride, and fatalism fills the room, as if Italy itself is compelled to act out the tragic role its leader has written for it. Within days, staff officers in Tirana, the capital of occupied Albania, are poring over maps that look like a hiker's nightmare. Endless contour lines, steep ridges, narrow passes. They try to find places where tanks could pass, where trucks might survive a day without sinking axle deep into mud. Spoiler, there aren't many. Italy's diplomats aren't even aware of the full plan. That's how secretive or chaotic Mussolini's decisions are. He wants surprise, a headline coup. Italian forces storm across the border, Athens captured before Berlin can react. After all, he reasons, Hitler grabbed Norway without asking. Why shouldn't Italy have its own Scandinavian-sized adventure, just warmer and with better coffee? Except, of course, it isn't warmer. It's October in the Balkans. Even the air feels damp, like it's been squeezed from a sponge. Italian meteorologists warn of incoming storms, but their reports are quietly ignored. The fascist newspapers keep publishing glowing front-page pieces about the destiny of the Latin race, complete with heroic art of clean-shaven soldiers standing under radiant suns. No mud, no snow, just glorious posters. Meanwhile, Greek intelligence hears the rumblings. Prime Minister Ioannis Metaxas, a gruff ex-general with an engineer's pragmatism, knows what's coming. He's fortified the Epirus frontier for years, just in case. Greece is neutral on paper, but it's leaning toward Britain diplomatically, and that alone makes Mussolini itch. The Greeks, short on heavy weapons, rely instead on terrain, morale, and mules. Lots of mules. Hundreds of them, capable of climbing where trucks can't. That modest logistical advantage will soon prove decisive. By mid-October, Mussolini's dream of a quick little war is finalized. The invasion is set for October 28th, a date picked more for symbolism than logic. It will mark the anniversary of the March on Rome, when he first rose to power. Every fascist state loves its anniversaries. And so, as dawn breaks on that fateful day, trumpets blare, propaganda films roll, and Italian troops move toward the border, convinced they're about to stage another imperial victory. You're with them now, trudging through the Pindus Mountains. The rain turns to sleet halfway up the slopes. The road, if you can call it that, is a scar of clay and stone carved by centuries of shepherds. Trucks bog down almost instantly. Mules slip and tumble, taking crates of ammunition with them. Your boots squelch in ankle-deep sludge that smells faintly of diesel and despair. Somewhere ahead, the sound of rifle fire. Short, sharp, disciplined. The Greeks are waiting. Their forward scouts have already spotted the column. The Italians expected minimal resistance, maybe a few border guards waving white flags. Instead, the defenders open up from ridge lines invisible in the mist. It's like shooting down a hallway where the walls are cliffs. The first day goes badly. The second, worse. By the third, entire battalions have lost contact with headquarters. Radios malfunction in the cold. Messages go by runner, who often vanish into ravines. A quirky detail. Italian officers were issued stylish leather gloves, impractical in sleet, so they cut holes in the fingers to write messages faster. The result? Frostbite. Sometimes fashion really is fatal. Behind the lines, Badoglio's staff receives frantic calls. "We need artillery. We've lost the bridge. No rations." The logistical chain collapses almost immediately. Fuel trucks can't reach the front, and local Albanian roads crumble under constant rain. Even the elite divisions like the Julia Alpini, famed mountain troops, find themselves surrounded by smaller Greek units who know every goat path by heart. Back in Rome, Mussolini is furious. "Why haven't they reached Ioannina yet?" he yells, slamming his desk. The reality? His army hasn't even cleared the first mountain range. Hitler, watching from Berlin, is unimpressed. He notes privately that the Italian performance complicates everything. That's diplomatic code for utter disaster. Still, the Italians push. They shell invisible targets. They charge up slopes that lead nowhere. They send cavalry patrols into snow squalls. Every night, men huddle around tiny stoves melting snow for water. Officers promise them the campaign will be over by Christmas. They don't specify which Christmas. And yet, in this grim picture, there's a haunting beauty. The mountain air is pure. The stars shockingly bright when clouds clear. You can almost forget you're part of a crumbling invasion. Almost. Until another mule dies from exhaustion and you're ordered to drag its load uphill yourself. Historians still argue whether Mussolini ever had a realistic chance. Some say, had he waited until spring, built roads, and secured German support, the invasion might have succeeded. Others counter that even perfect planning couldn't overcome Greece's geography, a land designed, it seems, to punish hubris. By early November, that punishment is well underway. Italian morale sags. Soldiers joke bitterly that they've invaded the moon because it's just as barren and hostile. And all across Europe, radio stations carry news of Italian setbacks. The mighty fascist empire, beaten back by shepherds and farmers with century-old rifles. The irony is impossible to miss. Mussolini wanted glory. He got snow. He wanted empire. He got embarrassment. You probably won't survive this, not because of enemy bullets, but because pride freezes faster than flesh at -10 degrees. It's early October, and the corridors of Rome echo with the polished boots of aides scurrying between offices. Somewhere in the Palazzo Venezia, Benito Mussolini leans over a massive map of the Balkans, his finger tracing the jagged line of the Albanian border. Greece, he says, almost tasting the word. It isn't a military term to him, it's theater. He imagines triumphal marches through Athens, Roman flags draped from the Parthenon, his name whispered alongside Caesar's. Across the desk, Pietro Badoglio, chief of the general staff, forces a polite smile that feels more like indigestion. He knows what's coming. Mussolini has been pacing for days, envious of Hitler's blitzkrieg headlines. France, Norway, Poland. Germany's conquests fill every newspaper. And what does Italy have? A few desert outposts and a reputation for grand parades. For a man obsessed with legacy, that's intolerable. Prepare an invasion of Greece, Mussolini declares, stabbing the map like a child marking treasure. We'll strike from Albania. It will be over before winter. Badoglio hesitates. He's an old soldier, trained when caution was a virtue. Albania, recently annexed, has the infrastructure of a goat farm. The roads are muddy scars through limestone hills. Ports are small, harbors crowded with fishing boats. Supplying an army through that mess would be like feeding an elephant through a straw. Signore, he begins carefully. The season. Mussolini cuts him off with a sharp hand. We conquered Ethiopia, did we not? Do not talk to me of weather. His voice fills the room, a practiced roar meant to drown doubt. Secretly, though, he's gambling. Hitler is bogged down negotiating with the Soviets and eyeing Yugoslavia. Mussolini wants to surprise him with a victory so dazzling, it forces Berlin to treat Rome as an equal. Historians still argue whether this was strategic opportunism or pure vanity. Personally, I'd say it was 80% ego, 20% calendar mismanagement. So Badoglio salutes, knowing resistance is pointless. He leaves the office muttering, "We'll need at least 10 divisions." But Mussolini's orders specify fewer than half. Speed and spirit will make up the rest, the Duce insists. Because nothing compensates for logistics like optimism and a good haircut. Preparing for the impossible. In Tirana, the Italian command begins its chaotic ballet. Maps are unrolled across dining tables in requisitioned villas. Officers argue over which mountain passes are traversable, a word that soon becomes elastic enough to include cliffs. The Pindus Mountains loom like a gray wall on every horizon, snow-dusted even before Halloween. Supply officers beg for better roads. Engineers shrug and ask for miracles. Meanwhile, Mussolini sends out flamboyant communiques to the press. The sons of Rome shall bring civilization to the Balkans. Newspapers print sketches of gleaming tanks charging through sunny valleys. No one mentions that those tanks, the Fiat M1340s, have narrow tracks perfect for desert sand, but laughably useless in mountain mud. You picture yourself as one of those junior logisticians standing in the rain beside a stalled convoy. A truck's axle snaps, crates spill open, shells, canned rations, some crates of Chianti for the officers. Everything smells faintly of wet cardboard. Nearby, a corporal curses as he tries to patch a hole in a fuel drum with chewing gum. Welcome to modern mechanized war, Italian edition. At the same time, political theater unfolds in Rome. Mussolini gathers his inner circle. Count Ciano, his suave son-in-law and foreign minister, among them. Hitler will be surprised, he boasts. Ciano raises an eyebrow. He knows that's an understatement. The Germans haven't even been told. The plan, Mussolini explains, is simple. Italy moves first. Then Germany is forced to acknowledge its partner's prowess. We'll show the world that Rome acts, not reacts. Ciano later writes in his diary, I fear the Duce is chasing a ghost of glory. Spoiler alert, he's right. Albania, the unlucky springboard. Albania, Poor Albania. Occupied since 1939, it's become Italy's Balkan outpost. But outpost might be generous. The roads crumble faster than they can be repaired. Bridges wobble like overcooked spaghetti. The port of Vlora handles a fraction of the supplies needed. When generals calculate logistics, the numbers look less like math and more like wishful thinking. Soldiers arriving from Italy are shocked. They expected marble barracks. They get leaking huts. Their winter uniforms are still somewhere in Naples. Rain soaks everything. Tents, maps, morale. And yet Mussolini insists the invasion proceed on schedule. The date, October 28th, is symbolic, the anniversary of his 1922 march on Rome. To delay it would offend fascist mythology. In totalitarian regimes, symbolism always trumps common sense. One quirky tidbit: Italian propaganda films begin shooting before the invasion even starts. They stage scenes of soldiers marching heroically, Greek civilians welcoming them, and generals pointing at distant mountains with confident grins. The film reels will later become an embarrassment. Reality refuses to match the script. As the invasion day approaches, whispers of dissent reach Badoglio. Field commanders complain they lack intelligence on Greek defenses. Aerial reconnaissance is limited. Fog covers everything. But Mussolini's orders are firm. Proceed. He wants Athens captured in 2 weeks. A walk to the Acropolis, he calls it. Somewhere, the gods of Olympus start sharpening their irony knives. The calm before the storm. In Athens, Prime Minister Ioannis Metexis receives the Italian ultimatum at dawn. The ambassador delivers it with all the theatrical flair of someone expecting surrender. Metexis listens, expression unreadable, and replies with one word: Oshi, no. It's calm, decisive, and becomes a national rallying cry overnight. Streets fill with citizens shouting Ohi, as if defiance itself could warm them against the approaching winter. Back across the Adriatic, Italian troops ready themselves. 2 main groups assemble: the Chaimoria Corps near the coast and the Julia Alpine Division in the mountains. Most soldiers are barely acclimatized to the terrain. Officers, many from aristocratic families, dine on tinned tuna and espresso brewed on spirit stoves while studying maps that show Greek fortifications drawn as vague question marks. Night falls on October 27th. You stand among them, the air wet and heavy. Somewhere in the valley below, thunder mutters like an impatient god. A lieutenant checks his watch, muttering, "At dawn, we march." No one cheers. The men are too tired, too unsure. The only real enthusiasm comes from the political commissars, already rehearsing victory speeches. Then dawn breaks, sort of. A mist so thick you could butter it rolls over the ridges. The invasion begins anyway. Columns of infantry file out, bayonets glinting like wet silver. Trucks groan up inclines, engines whining. For a moment, everything feels orderly, almost cinematic. Then, it rains. Not a drizzle. An unrelenting wall of water that turns dirt into soup. Within hours, vehicles sink to their hubs. Horses panic. A mule carrying mortar shells slips and tumbles off the road, exploding on impact. The march becomes a crawl. Behind the lines, supply officers watch helplessly as bridges wash away. "We need engineers," someone radios. "We are engineers," comes the bleak reply. Greek eyes in the mist. Across the ridge, Greek sentries peer through the fog. They've been expecting this. Their orders? Hold until reinforcements arrive. Most wear old British or French surplus uniforms. Some still carry Mannlicher rifles from World War I. Yet their advantage isn't technology, it's geography. They know every slope, every gully, every cave. When the first Italian columns appear, the Greeks open fire from above, rifles cracking like popcorn in the mist. Italian officers shout for artillery support, but the guns are still stuck on the roads. A few shells land short, one detonating behind friendly lines. chaos spreads faster than the rain. By midday, the front dissolves into isolated skirmishes. Communication lines snap. Battalions wander off course. The Julia Division, advancing through the Pindus Mountains, finds itself surrounded. Its commander, General Mario Girardi, requests air support. The airfields in Albania, however, are waterlogged. Planes can't even taxi without bogging down. A fascinating debate among historians. Was the Italian army's failure due more to bad weather or bad leadership? Both, probably. But leadership had the chance to plan around weather and didn't. That's the kind of oversight that turns campaigns into cautionary tales. Rome's reaction. Back in Rome, reports arrive draped in euphemisms. Initial resistance heavier than expected. Temporary setback. Strategic regrouping. Mussolini storms through the Situation Room, demanding to know why Athens hasn't fallen. Generals point at maps covered in red pins, each one a stalled unit. The Greeks are counterattacking, someone admits. The Greeks? Mussolini sneers. Peasants, shepherds, how can they counterattack? He refuses to believe it until photographs emerge. Italian prisoners, Greek troops posing proudly beside captured tanks. It's humiliating. In private, he blames everyone but himself. Badoglio, the weather, even the treacherous mules. Meanwhile, ordinary Italians sense the truth. Letters home describe endless mud, frostbitten fingers, rations cut in half. We fight ghosts and mountains, one soldier writes. Censors delete that line before it reaches his mother, but the sentiment spreads like mold through the ranks. For the first time, the fascist dream of imperial rebirth begins to look suspiciously mortal. And still, the order comes. Advance. Because when you've promised the world victory, retreat is not an option. At least, not one you admit in the headlines. So they press on, slipping, freezing, cursing. The sun sets early in those mountains, swallowed by clouds the color of gunmetal. Somewhere ahead, unseen, the Greeks are waiting again. You take a breath, shivering in your soaked greatcoat. The road winds upward into darkness. The war that was supposed to last 3 weeks has already begun to feel endless. Dawn breaks gray over the Pindus Mountains on October 28, 1940, and you're there, soaked, shivering, your rifle heavier with every step. The world smells of rain and gun oil. Somewhere behind you, officers shout orders swallowed by wind, and up ahead, fog turns cliffs into ghosts. This is the day Mussolini promised would make history. Technically, he's right. It will, just not the way he imagined. The first Italian shells fall across the border at 5 a.m. They explode among wet pine and startled sheep. Columns of infantry begin to move, their boots sucking at the mud like it's alive. Trucks rumble behind them, loaded with crates marked rations and morale. Both will run out faster than anyone expects. The invasion has two main thrusts, one along the coast toward Epirus and Ioannina, another through the high passes of the Pindus Range, where the elite Julia Alpine Division is supposed to outflank the Greeks. On paper, it looks neat and tidy, a pair of sweeping arrows on a staff map. On the ground, it's chaos wrapped in mist. Within hours, the plan starts to unravel. Roads marked as good on the Italian maps are barely goat tracks. Bridges crumble under trucks. A regiment trying to ford a river finds it swollen waist-deep and icy. Mules panic and break loose, scattering into the fog. Somewhere, a lieutenant writes in his logbook, "We have entered hell, and it is wet." Historians still argue whether Mussolini truly understood what he was sending his men into. Some claim he imagined Greece as a replay of Ethiopia, a short colonial skirmish against a backward foe. But Greece isn't Africa, and the Greeks aren't unarmed tribesmen. They're soldiers, veterans of the Balkan Wars and World War I, defending home ground with the grim patience of mountain people. The first encounter. You crest a ridge and see them at last, dark shapes moving among rocks. The Greeks open fire, crisp bursts that echo like thunder through the valleys. The Italians crouch, slip, return fire blindly into the mist. The first casualties fall before anyone really sees the enemy. At headquarters, radios hiss with half-heard reports. Contact at Ridge 1217, heavy resistance. A major taps the set and mutters that the Greeks must be outnumbered 3-1. They aren't. In most sectors, the Italians outnumber them. But numbers mean little when your artillery is still miles behind and your food is stuck in a mudslide. By the second day, forward units realize they've advanced barely 5 kilometers. The Giulia Division, pride of Italy's mountain corps, finds itself isolated. Rain turns to sleet. Their supply line shrinks to a single path carved into a ravine. Snow begins to fall early that year, white feathers landing on helmets. It's beautiful in a cruel way. There's a saying among the local villagers: the mountains choose their guests. The Italians were not invited. Greek mobilization. Down south, in Athens, church bells ring. Word of the invasion spreads faster than any radio. Within hours, queues form outside recruitment centers. Young men kiss their mothers, their sweethearts, and march off singing. Farmers donate mules. Fishermen hand over their boats for coastal patrols. Women knit socks by candlelight and bake bread for soldiers passing through their towns. It's chaos, but it's inspired chaos, the kind that sustains morale. Greek newspapers call it the hour of destiny. Propaganda posters appear overnight, rugged soldiers smiling in snow, slogans like 4-hour land, 4-hour honor. For once, it isn't exaggeration. The Greek army is small, barely 200,000 mobilized at first, but it's compact, disciplined, and fighting on familiar ground. Its commander, General Alexandros Papagos, immediately orders defensive positions strengthened along the Kalamis River and Pindus line. He's pragmatic, not flashy. His goal is simple: stop the Italians, then push them out. Back in the mountains, the Italians don't know this yet. They still think the Greeks will collapse once they reach Ioannina. Instead, the opposite happens. Every time the Italians gain a ridge, they're driven off again by counterfire, or worse, by the weather. The Giulia Division's ordeal. By November 1st, the Giulia Division is surrounded. Roughly 10,000 Alpini, Italy's elite mountain troops, find themselves trapped by Greek forces using skis, donkeys, and pure audacity. You can picture it: snow up to your knees, boots stiff as boards, ammunition down to the last clips. Night temperatures plunge below freezing. Fires give away positions, so the men shiver in silence. One quirky detail from survivor diaries: soldiers use grenades not as weapons but as makeshift hand warmers, pulling the pin half out to generate heat from the friction cap. Occasionally, it worked too well. The Greeks attack from higher slopes, rolling rocks down, sniping from ridges. At times, combat is so close you can hear each other's breath. After days of fighting, the Giulia Division tries to break out but is cut to pieces. Barely half manage to withdraw. The rest freeze, starve, or surrender. Back in Rome, the official communiques call it a successful reconnaissance. The troops call it what it is: disaster. Weather as an enemy. It's now early November. The rain has turned to snow for good, coating the high passes in drifts waist deep. Trucks are abandoned, engines seized. Horses die standing up, frozen mid-breath. Soldiers dig caves into hillsides just to survive the nights. An Italian medical officer records that frostbite cases exceed combat wounds. Our greatest enemy, he writes, is not the Greek, but the cold. He isn't exaggerating. Fuel runs low, fires are banned near the front, and wet boots never dry. Some soldiers resort to wrapping their feet in pages from fascist newspapers. They claim Il Duce finally keeps them warm. Historians often highlight this campaign as a textbook case of logistical collapse. Supplies meant for forward units vanish along the way. Drivers dump crates to lighten loads. One convoy loses its way entirely and ends up in Yugoslavia. The command in Rome blames the Albanian terrain. The Albanian locals blame Italian arrogance. Both are right. And yet, amid all this misery, something remarkable happens. The Greeks start to push back. The counteroffensive begins. By November 14th, the Italian advance has stalled everywhere. Greek forces, now reinforced by reserve divisions and Highlanders from Epirus, launch a counterattack. Trumpets sound through the fog, a mix of ceremony and challenge. You see them coming through the snow, lines of men in capes, rifles steady, eyes bright with something fierce and old. The Italians fire wildly, but they're cold, hungry, demoralized. Their artillery shells fizzle or miss entirely. Within days, the Greeks retake lost ground. Villages that hung Italian flags a week before now hoist blue and white ones again. You trudge backward through the mud, wondering how this happened. Weren't you the modern army? Weren't you the empire of Rome reborn? Yet the Greeks keep coming, sure-footed, almost casual in their defiance. They climb slopes like goats while Italian soldiers slip and slide. One night you hear a Greek officer shouting orders in French, a relic of their earlier alliances. His voice echoes down the valley. En avant, mes enfants! For a strange second, it sounds less like war and more like history itself, laughing. By November 20th, the Italians are not just retreating, they're running. Greek cavalry captures entire supply dumps. An entire regiment is cut off and forced to surrender in the town of Corce. Radios in Rome fall silent. Mussolini fumes, demanding counterattacks that no one can execute. Back in Rome, in his marble office, the Duce paces like a caged lion. Reports pile up. Greek forces entering Albania, morale collapsing, weather worsening. He refuses to believe them. Impossible, he yells. We outnumber them 2-1. His staff avoids eye contact. Badoglio, who warned him, finally says, "The Greeks fight like lions, Duce." Mussolini snarls, "Lions led by Englishmen." But he knows the truth. This is an Italian failure, not a British trick. Fascist propaganda now faces its own crisis. Newspapers can't hide the defeat forever. So they pivot. Stories of heroism, of soldiers holding back the barbarian tide, of temporary reversals. The phrase temporaneo becomes a national joke whispered in cafes. A scholarly debate still simmers. Did Mussolini's decision to attack Greece directly force Hitler's hand in the Balkans? Many believe yes. Germany, planning to invade the Soviet Union the next year, now must divert forces south to bail out its ally. Italy's vanity will end up reshaping the entire Axis strategy. The human cost. You sit beside a dying fire, steam rising from your soaked uniform. Around you, men cough, mutter, pray. Some carve initials into their rifle stocks. Others stare into nothing. The mountains are silent except for wind. The war that was supposed to last weeks has become a nightmare of attrition. Occasionally, a mule bell rings faintly in the distance. A Greek patrol passing through captured territory. You close your eyes and imagine home. Sunlight on Rome's piazzas, warm bread, laughter. Instead, the only warmth here comes from the barrel of your rifle cooling after a pointless skirmish. In this frozen stalemate, courage begins to mean survival. You learn to move quietly, conserve bullets, share cigarettes. You learn that empires can freeze, and that the will of a small nation, armed mostly with faith and geography, can melt them away. You probably won't survive this, at least not unchanged. The snow keeps falling, soft and relentless, burying ambition beneath a white silence that even Mussolini's speeches can't penetrate. By late November 1940, the map on Mussolini's wall looks nothing like the one his generals promised him. The red arrows he'd drawn toward Athens now curl backward like wilted flowers. The Greeks haven't just stopped the Italian advance, they've turned it around. And for the first time since Italy entered the war, Rome's myth of invincibility begins to crack. Out there on the slopes of Epirus, you're still trudging through freezing rain that refuses to become snow, because even the weather seems indecisive. The mud clings to your boots, the straps on your pack cut into your shoulders, and your rifle feels like an anchor. You wonder how long it's been since you've eaten something warm. You wonder if anyone in Rome knows what it's really like here. The campaign's early chaos has now ripened into full-blown disarray. Entire regiments lose contact for days. Units retreat without orders, sometimes right through their own artillery lines. Command posts are abandoned overnight because officers can't find dry places to sleep. The supply chain collapses so badly that soldiers start looting local Albanian villages, not out of cruelty, but simple hunger. Command in confusion. Back in Tirana, the Italian headquarters is an orchestra of panic. Generals crowd around maps littered with pins, each one representing a unit whose real location is a mystery. Pietro Badoglio sits at a long table with his staff, chain-smoking and pretending to look in control. His subordinates whisper that the front has become liquid, a polite word for, "We have no idea what's happening." Reports contradict each other. One division claims to have held its line. Another insists the same line was overrun yesterday. The telegraph wires hum with bad news. Bridges down, rations gone, morale collapsing. The Duce demands progress, and the generals respond with euphemisms. Localized withdrawals becomes code for, "We're running downhill faster than gravity." The worst part? No one agrees on who's in charge. Rivalries between Army, Navy, and Air Force fester like open wounds. Each blames the others for failure. The Army says the Air Force won't fly in bad weather. The Air Force says the Army's requests are impossible to interpret. In truth, both are right. Historians still argue about how much of this chaos came from incompetence versus arrogance. The Italian officer corps was deeply fractured. Old aristocrats clinging to outdated tactics, fascist loyalists hungry for favor, and professionals like Badoglio trapped between politics and practicality. In a modern war that demanded coordination, they produced confusion instead. You might think things couldn't get worse. You'd be wrong. The Greek advance. By early December, the Greeks have pushed across the border into Albania. Their counteroffensive is almost unbelievable. Small units advancing through knee-deep snow, supported by mules and villagers carrying supplies in baskets. Their artillery, often dragged by oxen, somehow keeps up. It's less a mechanized army and more a moving miracle. One Greek soldier later recalls, "We were starving, but we laughed. The Italians had come to conquer us, and now they were running from us. That was enough to keep us warm." You see it firsthand. The retreat, the disbelief, the shame. Italian positions crumble overnight. When you reach a new ridge, there are already Greek soldiers on it. Their bugles echo down the valleys, and the sound carries a strange confidence. They're not afraid. You are. The Greeks retake Korch on November 22nd. It's a symbolic moment, the first Axis-occupied city to be liberated in World War II. Crowds pour into the streets, waving flags, singing old war songs from the Balkan Wars. In Athens, church bells ring again, and foreign correspondents start using words like miracle. The British smell opportunity. Churchill, delighted to see someone finally standing up to the Axis, sends limited air support and supplies. RAF squadrons begin flying from Crete and Egypt to harass Italian positions. It's not much, but it boosts Greek morale and gives Mussolini something new to complain about. A winter of humiliation. December brings bitter cold, and the Italian army, still without proper winter uniforms, suffers horribly. Frostbite becomes epidemic. Men wrap their feet in newspaper and tear blankets into makeshift scarves. Italian trucks, built for Mediterranean roads, seize up in the cold, while Greek sleds glide effortlessly across snowdrifts. Everywhere, the same grim scenes. Soldiers huddled in trenches carved from ice. Campfires that smoke but never warm. rations frozen solid. You find humor where you can. At least, one private jokes, the mosquitoes are gone. Another answers, they froze to death before we did. The high command's orders grow increasingly delusional. Mussolini sends telegrams demanding a new offensive before Christmas, as if morale can be conjured by decree. Badoglio tries to explain that the troops are exhausted, but the Duce won't hear it. He even considers taking personal command at the front, a disastrous idea everyone quietly prays he'll forget. Still, the offensive goes ahead. On December 8th, the Italians attack near Thermopylae, hoping to push the Greeks back from the Shkumbin River. What happens instead is textbook futility. The artillery shells misfire or freeze in their barrels. Infantry slog uphill through snow, only to find the Greeks dug in deep, their machine guns perfectly sighted. By nightfall, the attack dissolves. Entire battalions vanish into the whiteout. A quirky but telling moment. An Italian war correspondent, desperate to film heroic footage, stages a mock charge for the cameras. The men pretend to advance, shouting "Avanti" for the lens. Minutes later, Greek shells land on the hill. The film survives. The soldiers don't. Propaganda meets reality. Back home, Italian newsreels show triumphant montages of marching troops and waving flags. The narration calls the invasion a glorious struggle against barbarism. But letters from the front tell another story. Censors can't stop all of them. Families begin whispering that their sons are fighting ghosts in the mountains. One Roman newspaper accidentally prints the wrong headline. Italian advance continues. On the same day, the Greeks capture the port of Pogradach. The editor is quietly reassigned to the Ministry of Silence, also known as retirement. Mussolini, meanwhile, starts losing sleep. He complains that Hitler isn't helping enough, though he's the one who insisted Italy could win alone. In private meetings, he blames Badoglio for lack of will, which is rich coming from a man who thought snow would melt before November. By Christmas, Italy's situation is desperate. The front has frozen, literally and figuratively. Casualties mount, supplies dwindle, morale sinks. A soldier writes home, "The only thing advancing is the snow." A night in the mountains. You're there on Christmas Eve, crouched in a trench near Klissura Pass. The sky glows faintly blue from reflected snow. Somewhere in the distance, someone's singing softly in Greek, a hymn maybe, or a lullaby. It drifts across no man's land like smoke. The Italians listen in silence. One of your comrades mutters, "Even their music wins." You try to laugh, but your throat's too dry. Your breath hangs in the air, ghost-like. The rations are down to hard bread and beans that crunch with frost. In the early hours, a blizzard rolls in. The wind howls like an engine. Tents collapse. You pull your coat tighter, teeth chattering so hard it hurts. Snow piles on your helmet until it feels like wearing stone. You think of home, warm lights, wine, a radio playing soft jazz. Here, the only rhythm is wind and distant gunfire. Morning brings another attack. The Greeks strike again, pressing toward Klissura and Thermopylae. Their tactics are simple. Climb high, dig in, outweight the enemy. The Italians counterattack half-heartedly, slipping in the ice. When orders come to advance, men just stare blankly at their officers. You can't fight the cold, the hunger, the humiliation. And yet, amid the misery, a strange camaraderie forms. Soldiers share scraps of tobacco, whisper jokes, carve initials into frozen rifles. One finds a stray puppy, names it Vittoria, victory, as a joke. When it disappears days later, the men don't talk about it. Superstition hangs heavier than snow. Rome's reckoning. Back in Rome, Mussolini faces political crisis. His dream of a Balkan empire has turned into a national embarrassment. Even fascist loyalists grumble. The German ambassador reports to Berlin that Italy's armies are in a state of moral collapse. Badoglio finally resigns in December, blamed for failures he'd predicted. In his place, Mussolini appoints Ugo Cavaliero, another career officer who promises miracles. None come. Meanwhile, Hitler fumes. The Balkans were supposed to stay quiet while he prepared for Operation Barbarossa, his invasion of the Soviet Union. Now, thanks to Mussolini's blunder, the Wehrmacht will have to divert south to rescue its ally. It's the first crack in their partnership, a rift that will widen with time and blood. Historians often call the Greek campaign Mussolini's Winter War, borrowing the term from Finland's earlier stand against the Soviets. The comparison fits. Small nations can embarrass giants when they fight with clarity and purpose. You probably won't survive this, at least not as the soldier who left Italy months ago. The cold strips more than flesh. It strips illusions. You stare across the White Mountains and realize something that generals never do until it's too late. Sometimes, nature itself takes sides. It's early January 1941, and the mountains of southern Albania groan under a new layer of snow. The trees look petrified, the rivers frozen in mid-roar, and the wind whistles through valleys like a living thing. You're half buried in a trench that was supposed to be temporary 2 months ago. Now it's home, if home can smell like damp wool and burnt coffee grounds. The Greek counteroffensive hasn't slowed. The Italians, for all their bluster, are the ones hanging on. You wake before dawn because you can't sleep anyway. The cold presses against your eyelids like weights. A sentry mutters that the thermometer fell below -15 degrees Celsius overnight, though the thermometer itself cracked hours ago. Rations arrive late, frozen lumps of beans and bread that need a bayonet to chip apart. Somewhere nearby, a sergeant jokes that even the bullets are too cold to fire. No one laughs. And then, through the gray silence comes the sound that freezes blood faster than any storm. Trumpets. Not Italian ones, but Greek bugles echoing through the passes. The Greeks are attacking again. The counter-surge begins. Since mid-November, their advance has been relentless. Each valley captured becomes a launch pad for the next. By January, they've taken Korch, Pogradec, and Gjirokastar. Names that sound exotic in Rome but taste like ash here. Their troops move like they've merged with the terrain itself. Infantry scrambling up scree slopes that no map says are passable. Mules hauling artillery pieces that seem to defy gravity. Greek supply columns snake up single-track paths, guided by villagers who know every ridge by smell. They use bells tied to goats as navigation in fog. It's half folklore, half genius. Historians still argue whether it was local intuition or organized logistics that made this possible. The truth, as usual, lies somewhere between. You and your comrades fire until your rifle bolts freeze. Then you beat them open with the heel of your palm. The noise rolls across the valley like metal thunder. Snow explodes in white plumes as shells land. You can't tell if the shivering is fear or temperature anymore. By nightfall, orders arrive. Retreat to the second line near Klissura. It's your 5th strategic withdrawal in as many weeks. The phrase has become a running joke, though the laughter is brittle. Morale on the edge. In Tirana, the Italian High Command writes glowing reports about heroic resistance. At the front, heroism means trying to dig a foxhole in frozen ground. Soldiers curse the officers who still talk of Rome's destiny. Some whisper that the Duce's speeches should be packed into artillery shells. They're the only thing that still explodes on command. Fascist commissars prowl the trenches, shouting slogans and quoting Mussolini like scripture. They talk about Latin vitality while wrapped in double coats. You watch one slip on ice and tumble into a snowbank. No one helps him up. They're too busy pretending not to see. Yet, amid the misery, there are flashes of stubborn humanity. An Alpine corporal starts carving small wooden icons of saints for his men. A Sicilian private teaches a northern comrade to curse in dialect so colorfully it makes the others grin. The company's last radio, sputtering between static, occasionally picks up Greek folk songs. Someone says, "Even their music sounds like it's winning." The Greeks push on. General Papagos, commanding the Greek army, shows none of Mussolini's theatrical style. He plans cautiously, moves deliberately, and trusts his officers. Under him, the Greeks exploit every Italian weakness: narrow passes, poor supply, overconfidence. Their divisions advance one ridge at a time, digging in so securely that each gain becomes permanent. In mid-January, they take the Clissura Pass after a battle fought in waist-deep snow. Italian artillery hammers the slopes, but Greek mountain troops crawl through gullies, unseen, until they're within grenade-throwing distance. When the Italians finally withdraw, they leave behind hundreds of frozen bodies that stand upright, rifles still clutched. A war correspondent later calls them statues of defeat. You trudge through that same pass days later. The air reeks of cordite and pine sap. Abandoned helmets dot the snow like dull silver coins. Your breath fogs in the stillness, and for a moment, the silence feels holy. Then you notice the ravens circling overhead, and the holiness fades. Rome reacts badly. News of the Clissura loss hits Rome like an avalanche. Mussolini slams his fist on the council table so hard an inkwell explodes. "It's temporary," he insists. "We'll retake it at once." His ministers nod because that's safer than disagreeing. He orders new divisions shipped from Italy, but the ports are clogged and the ships lack winter gear. Reinforcements arrive without proper boots or overcoats. Some soldiers are issued straw to stuff into their shoes, a trick borrowed from farmers. It works for about 10 minutes. To reassure the public, Mussolini delivers one of his famous balcony speeches. He bellows about our glorious struggle in the mountains, while the crowd below cheers half-heartedly. The moment he steps inside, an aide whispers the latest telegram: another retreat. Even Hitler begins to lose patience. "The Italians have given me a Balkan ulcer," he tells his staff. Berlin's military attachés report that morale in the Italian ranks hovers between resignation and mutiny. The front freezes. By late January, both armies are exhausted. The snow muffles everything: sound, movement, even the war itself. You can march for hours hearing nothing but the creak of your gear and the distant crack of ice. In this eerie quiet, the line stabilizes roughly along the valleys of southern Albania. Greeks have advanced nearly 50 kilometers from their original border, more than Mussolini's men ever managed in the opposite direction. The Great Italian Invasion has become a defensive war on foreign soil. At night, you stare into the darkness and wonder how it came to this. You remember the posters back home: gleaming helmets, marching columns, sunlit conquests. None of them showed what happens when an empire meets a mountain range that doesn't care about empires. There's a quirky rumor spreading through the ranks that Greek troops carry icons of St. George that glow faintly before battle. You don't believe it, but when you see a Greek patrol moving like shadows against the snow, you almost start to. Greek resolve. Down in Athens, the winter victories turn Metaxas and Papagos into national heroes. Crowds sing the Epitaphios, an ancient hymn for the fallen, reworked with new lyrics, praising the soldiers in Epirus. The sons of Marathon return, headlines proclaim. Schools teach children to memorize battle reports like poetry, but victory has a cost. Greece's resources are stretched to the limit. Ammunition runs low. Uniforms are patched beyond recognition. Even so, morale remains unbreakable. When British envoys warn Metaxas that Germany might soon intervene, he shrugs and says, "Then we shall fight the Germans too." Historians still debate how long Greece could have held if left alone. Some argue that their lines were already fraying by February. Others say their discipline might have carried them through spring. What's certain is that, by humiliating Italy, they forced Hitler's hand and sealed their own fate. Life in the trenches. You settle into routine, if it can be called that. Dawn brings frostbite checks. Noon brings rations, if the mules make it through. Evening brings boredom, punctuated by mortar shells. You learn to distinguish sounds. A Greek rifle versus an Italian carcano. The scrape of skis on crusted snow. Letters from home arrive weeks late. Your mother writes about rationing. Your brother about the new radio show on EIAR. You fold the letters carefully. Read them again during lulls. Sometimes you wonder if anyone in Rome believes the strategic success headlines anymore. There's one bright memory, a ceasefire during a snowstorm when both sides pause fighting. You and a Greek soldier, separated by only 30 meters of drift, shout at each other through the white blur. You trade curses first, then laughter. Someone throws a cigarette across. For one strange minute, the war feels absurdly small. The spiral of blame. When February arrives, Mussolini summons his generals again. The atmosphere is glacial in more ways than one. Badoglio's replacement, Cavaliero, proposes a grand spring offensive to restore national honor. The Duce seizes on it immediately. "We will strike with overwhelming force," he declares, "and the world will see Italian courage reborn." You can almost hear the mountains laughing. Cavaliero's staff begins planning Operation Primavera. It will launch in March with fresh divisions, tanks, and air support. Never mind that none of these assets exist yet. Engineers promise to improve the roads. Weather officers promise the snow will melt early. Everyone promises something. Back at the front, those promises sound like fairy tales. Ammunition is rationed to 5 rounds per man per day. Artillery pieces have worn barrels. The medical tents overflow with frostbite and trench foot. But rumor spreads that the Duce himself might visit the front. The idea fills the men with equal parts dread and amusement. A visit from the Duce. In late February, Mussolini does indeed arrive, wrapped in a fur coat, surrounded by cameras and guards. He tours a section of the line near Thermopylae. Soldiers, warned in advance, line up stiffly despite the cold. "Courage, my children," he shouts, slapping a corporal on the shoulder. The corporal nearly faints from shock or hunger. Afterward, the Duce eats hot stew in a heated tent while officers brief him on the forthcoming victory. Outside, you and the others chew frozen bread and stare at the same mountains that have already eaten 2 armies. Still, for a brief moment, morale lifts. Maybe because if the man responsible for this mess has to trudge through a bit of snow, the universe feels slightly fairer. When Mussolini leaves, he promises, "By spring, Italy will triumph." The men nod because what else can they do? The snow continues to fall as his convoy disappears down the valley. You exhale, watching your breath rise like smoke, and whisper to no one in particular, "Spring can't come soon enough." But the mountains are listening, and they have other plans. Spring doesn't come. It creeps, grudgingly, one cold drizzle at a time. By early March 1941, the Albanian front is a graveyard of frozen ambitions and rusting equipment, but the brass in Rome call it renewal. After all, Operation Primavera, springtime, has been approved. It's the grand counter-offensive that will restore Italian pride, redeem Mussolini's reputation, and erase 5 months of humiliation. Or so the propaganda says. You're there when the orders reach the trenches. The men stare at the notice nailed to a telegraph pole. Offensive begins March 9th. Objective, Klysura Pass. Someone mutters, "We barely survived winter, now they want us to fight the mountains again." No one argues. The only thing thinner than the rations is belief, but headquarters insists. Trains rattle north from Bari and Brindisi, loaded with new divisions, the Puglie, Siena, Piacenza, and Lupi di Toscana. Fresh uniforms, new rifles, even tanks with slogans painted on their hulls. Avanti Italia. It looks impressive on paper, which, to Mussolini, is the same thing as reality. Historians still debate whether he truly thought this would work or simply needed a spectacle before Hitler lost all patience. Either way, he decides to personally oversee the offensive. The Duce will stand on a hill, binoculars in hand, as his legions sweep the Greeks aside. A Roman emperor reborn, if the mud cooperates. The calm before springtime. For days, the weather teases with small mercies. Patches of blue sky, trickles of meltwater, a sun that almost feels warm. Then it rains again. The roads, briefly passable, dissolve into soup, Engineers curse, drivers weep, convoys sink axle deep, horses collapse mid-march. A staff officer notes that a single kilometer of advance costs 3 trucks, 2 mules, and at least 1 soul. Yet the mood in Tirana is hysterically upbeat. Posters bloom on every wall. Il Duce comanda, la vittoria è vicino. Reporters arrive from Rome to film the rebirth of fascist arms. They're issued white scarves and told not to film dead animals or dead soldiers. Every lens points toward Mussolini, who arrives in a convoy of black lancias, wrapped in fur, face flushed with theatrical purpose. You watch from the roadside as he passes, the mud spraying like applause. For a moment, the troops cheer, not from love, but from the desperate hope that maybe this time their suffering will mean something. He salutes stiffly, the cameras whirring, then disappears toward the forward command post. That night, as rain batters the canvas of your tent, you hear a joke whispered down the line. Springtime in Albania, flowers for the dead. It spreads faster than frost. March 9th, the offensive. At dawn, artillery opens up with a roar that shakes the valleys. 800 guns, 15 minutes of thunder. The sky flashes orange. The air tastes of cordite and limestone. You'd almost think it's working, until the smoke clears and you see the same Greek positions, untouched, perched on ridges like stone castles. The Italians go forward anyway. Waves of infantry climb slopes slick with melted snow. The Greeks wait until they're halfway up, then unleash everything. Machine guns, mortars, rifles firing so fast it sounds like tearing cloth. Within minutes, the hillside is dotted with men who'll never reach the top. Reports call it stiff resistance. In reality, it's slaughter. Tanks attempt to join, but the terrain chews them alive. Their narrow tracks spin uselessly. Engines overheat. One Fiat M13 slides sideways into a ravine, vanishing with a metallic shriek. Air support is grounded by low cloud. The only thing flying is shrapnel. By afternoon, casualties are catastrophic. Medics work knee-deep in mud, their stretchers sinking as fast as they fill. The Greeks, entrenched and disciplined, counterattack with bayonets and grenades. A captured diary from a Greek officer later describes the scene. They came on like ghosts in gray, brave but blind. We killed them because the mountain left no other choice. You fight until your rifle jams, then crawl back down the slope under tracer fire. Behind you, the wounded call for help that can't come. The rain begins again, steady, pitiless, washing blood into the gullies. The Duce's view. Mussolini watches the battle from a stone terrace above Tepelina. He's furious that his binoculars fog, that his gloves are wet, that victory refuses to appear on schedule. When the first casualty reports arrive, heavy losses, no breakthrough, he storms into the command tent. "Impossible," he barks. "They will attack again tomorrow." General Cavallero nods obediently, though everyone knows it's suicide. The offensive continues for 2 more weeks, each assault bloodier than the last. The Duce demands artillery barrages of Roman magnitude. They oblige. The mountains absorb it all, unbothered. One quirky episode from those days, journalists accompanying Mussolini are instructed to film only his upper body, so the camera won't capture his boots sinking in the mud. Later, the footage will be edited into triumphant newsreels, complete with rousing music. In reality, the offensive gains less than a kilometer. Voices from the line. You hear the cries of men who've stopped caring about politics. A captain sobs after losing half his company. A medic mutters prayers in dialect older than Italy itself. The rain drums on helmets like slow applause. Each night, trucks bring more replacements, fresh faces who disappear within days. Letters stop coming. Even censorship can't disguise the disaster anymore. Soldiers burn the propaganda leaflets for warmth. A rumor spreads that Mussolini will order poison gas if the line breaks. Another rumor says Hitler has forbidden it. You don't know which is worse, that it might happen or that it might not, and the dying will continue the slow way. Historians still debate the numbers. Most agree that between March 9th and 26th, Italy loses around 12,000 men killed, wounded, or frozen. The Greeks suffer too, but they hold every ridge. The only thing the Italians capture is pneumonia. A letter never sent. One night, you find a scrap of dry paper and start writing a letter you'll never post. Mama, they told us we were marching to glory, but the only thing we've conquered is this mud. The Greeks don't run, they wait. The mountains don't move, they swallow. If you see news of our victory, don't believe it. If you see my name on a list, light a candle and open the window so the smoke can find me. You fold it carefully and tuck it inside your tunic. The next morning, the wind carries flakes of paper from someone else's burned diary across the trench. The words are gone before they hit the ground. The end of springtime. By late March, the offensive fizzles out. The guns fall silent not because peace returns, but because there's nothing left to fire. Cavallero reports to Rome that the operation has achieved its strategic goals. Nobody asks what those goals were. Mussolini returns to Italy in silence. His entourage tries to cheer him up during the flight, but he stares out the window at the mountains below, those same ridges that defied his empire. Later, one of his aides recalls him whispering, "They will not forgive me." Whether he meant the Italians or the mountains is unclear. On the ground, the Greeks prepare for their own spring offensive, but they're exhausted too. Both sides bleed into stalemate. The snow begins to melt, uncovering what winter hid. Bodies, broken rifles, letters half buried in mud. You realize the landscape itself has become an archive of folly. The shadow of Berlin, far to the north. Hitler has had enough. The British have begun landing troops in Greece to bolster the defense, threatening Germany's flank before the upcoming invasion of the Soviet Union. If Greece remains a battlefield, it could jeopardize the entire Axis plan. So he decides to clean up Mussolini's mess the only way he knows how, by unleashing the Wehrmacht. Preparations for Operation Merida begin. Panzer divisions assemble in Bulgaria. Luftwaffe squadrons fill Balkan airfields. The German generals treat the Italian front as an embarrassment to be erased. Mussolini's failure has now forced his allies' hand. Back in the trenches, you sense the shift. Strange aircraft buzz overhead. German reconnaissance planes mapping terrain. Officers whisper about help from Berlin. The men call it what it is: rescue with humiliation attached. The last cold nights. April approaches. The days grow longer, but warmth refuses to settle. You spend evenings watching the horizon, wondering what fresh disaster will roll over these peaks next. Sometimes the sky glows faintly to the east. German flares during night exercises. The Greeks watch them too, uneasy but defiant. Then, one morning, orders arrive. Hold position. Do not engage unless attacked. It feels like the calm before a new storm. You clean your rifle, though the metal flakes with rust. You light the last cigarette in your pack. The smoke tastes like damp paper and resignation. Behind you, truck convoys rumble south, carrying German officers in crisp uniforms. They don't wave, they don't need to. Everyone knows who will finish what Italy started. You lie back against the trench wall, eyes half closed, and think how strange it is that spring finally smells like diesel and pine sap instead of death. You almost allow yourself a hopeful thought, until the first German column crests the ridge, engines growling like thunder. The new storm has arrived. It's the first week of April, 1941. You wake to an unfamiliar sound, deep, rolling, methodical. Not thunder, not Greek guns. This is something else. The German war machine moving through the Balkans. Tanks, half-tracks, endless convoys. The ground trembles like a living thing. You look up from your trench, and for the first time in months, the sky is clear. It feels wrong, too bright, too calm, as if nature itself is holding its breath. The Germans have come. Operation Merida has begun. Berlin steps in. For Hitler, it's not charity, it's strategy. The failed Italian invasion has endangered his grand plan, the forthcoming assault on the Soviet Union. The Balkans must be secured before that campaign can launch, and the British presence in Greece is an unacceptable thorn. So, on the 6th of April, German forces pour south from Bulgaria into northern Greece and Yugoslavia. Mussolini pretends to welcome the move, calling it a noble gesture of alliance. But everyone knows the truth. Italy has lost control of its own war. Historians still debate whether he begged for help or whether Hitler imposed it on him. Either way, the result is the same. Rome's prestige collapses under the weight of German efficiency. From your vantage point in the Albanian hills, you can already feel the shift. The Germans move like a different species of soldier. Disciplined, methodical, frighteningly quiet. Italian officers who once barked orders now defer to visiting Wehrmacht majors with clipped accents and polished boots. Even their vehicles seem to hum with arrogance. The Greeks face a new enemy. On the Greek side, there's disbelief. They've spent 5 months fighting one foe, only to find another, far deadlier one on their flank. In Thessaloniki, sirens wail as the Luftwaffe descends. Bridges vanish in fireballs. Airfields become infernos. The German blitzkrieg unfolds with surgical precision, cutting communications and sowing panic. Greek troops who had been chasing Italians through the mountains now face the impossible, turning north while still holding their western front. Their commanders know what this means. Their brilliant defensive war has reached its tragic limit. Still, the morale among them doesn't crumble. If we must fall, one officer tells his men, let it be standing. They fight on, shifting units with astonishing speed, using every hour they can steal from fate. The Italian perspective, from where you sit, the sudden silence of Greek artillery is unnerving. For months, they've shelled your positions day and night. Now it stops. Then word spreads through the trenches like wildfire. The Germans are smashing through Macedonia. The Greeks are pulling back. Italian newspapers, sensing salvation, explode with headlines. The Allies united in triumph. They conveniently skip the part where the Ally did all the work. Mussolini beams before the cameras again, declaring that Axis unity will crush the Hellenic resistance. Behind closed doors, he sulks. Hitler has stolen the victory he craved. The irony is rich. Italy's supposed conquest of Greece will end with German boots in Athens, not Italian. Retreat and collapse. By April 10th, the German 12th Army has broken the Metaxas line, a chain of Greek fortifications once thought impregnable. Entire divisions are forced to withdraw south toward Thermopylae. Yes, that Thermopylae. History has a cruel sense of humor. Meanwhile, in Albania, your own front line begins to move, but not forward. Orders arrive to advance in coordination with German progress, which really means follow the Germans and claim credit afterward. You march down valleys that were death traps a week ago, past corpses half melted from the thaw, past wrecked trucks that smell of oil and ghosts. When you reach the abandoned Greek trenches, you find neat stacks of ammunition, cooking pots, even handwritten notes wishing the next occupant better luck. There's bitterness in the air, but also respect. Your enemies have withdrawn with dignity that your commanders could only imitate. At one ridge, a corporal finds a Greek flag still fluttering. Instead of tearing it down, he folds it carefully and tucks it into his pack. They fought like men, he says simply. No one disagrees. The view from the sky. For the first time in the entire campaign, the Luftwaffe dominates the air. German Stukas dive through sunlight, their sirens shrieking like mechanical banshees. You watch them with awe and envy. They actually hit their targets. Each explosion feels like punctuation in a sentence Italy started but could never finish. One Stuka pilot later describes the sight below. Italian columns trudging behind his formation, waving helmets as if cheering. They looked, he writes, like spectators of their own liberation. The fall of Athens. By mid-April, the Greek army is split in two. One part retreating south, the other trapped in Epirus, still facing you. Exhausted, undersupplied, surrounded by both Italians and Germans, they finally surrender on the 23rd of April. Their commander insists on giving his sword only to a German general, not an Italian one. The gesture speaks volumes. On the 27th of April, 1941, German troops march into Athens. Black cross flags rise over the Acropolis. Italian officers, relegated to side streets, watch silently as photographers capture what will be remembered as the fall of Greece. You hear about it days later via a garbled radio broadcast. The campaign in Greece is concluded with complete success. You look around at your mud-stained comrades, the hollow eyes, the frost-bitten fingers, and wonder what success even means. Aftermath in the mountains. For a brief moment, Italy's humiliation is masked by the illusion of victory. Propaganda trumpets joint Axis achievement. Medals are issued. Generals pose for photos. But behind the scenes, everyone knows the truth. Without German intervention, the entire Italian expedition would have collapsed before spring. In the captured Greek towns, civilians greet the Italians with wary eyes. Children peek from doorways. Priests cross themselves as columns pass. You expect hatred, but mostly you see exhaustion. The people have survived invasion, occupation, and winter. They're too tired to curse anyone. At night, when the campfires flicker against the stone walls, whispers travel faster than the wind. The Duce's dream is finished, one officer says. We've traded pride for pity. Another adds, at least Berlin won't let us starve. Yet. A bitter victory. In Rome, the official narrative unfolds like a tragic comedy. Mussolini congratulates his troops for their heroic perseverance, as if perseverance were the same as success. Posters appear showing Italian and German soldiers shaking hands under the slogan Due Nazioni, un destino. 2 nations, 1 destiny. Few Italians believe it. Badoglio, safely retired but still alive to gloat, mutters to a friend, I told him, mountains don't salute dictators. The numbers are staggering. Nearly 90,000 Italian casualties since October 1940, thousands more missing. Equipment lost, morale shattered. The Greek campaign has drained Italy's resources and reputation alike. Even Mussolini's inner circle admits the empire dream is over. Yet, paradoxically, among the soldiers themselves, a strange calm settles. They've endured the impossible and lived. They've seen courage on both sides and learned the limits of slogans. You sit under a fading sky and realize that, in some crooked way, you've grown wiser than the men giving orders. A scholar's view. Decades later, historians will still argue about the meaning of this war within a war. Some call it a minor sideshow in the grand scheme of World War II. Others insist it was a turning point, that Hitler's decision to bail out Mussolini delayed the invasion of Russia by crucial weeks, contributing to the German failure before Moscow. There's even a fringe theory, half legend, half poetic justice, that the snows which stopped Mussolini's troops in the Pindus were the same that later froze the Wehrmacht on the road to the Soviet capital, as if nature itself demanded repayment. You can't prove it, but it feels right. Small acts of humanity. Before being redeployed, your unit is ordered to pacify a nearby village. The word sends a chill through everyone. Too many such orders end in atrocities. But when you arrive, the villagers come out carrying bread and water. An old man offers you olive oil, saying, "For your hands, they look colder than ours." You thank him in broken Greek. That night, you and your comrades share food with them instead of looting. One of the children sings a lullaby. For a few fleeting hours, the war steps aside and lets humanity breathe. Later, your sergeant confides, "If we'd met like this in October, maybe none of this would have happened." You nod, because he's right, and because words feel too heavy to use anymore. The shadow of what comes next. But peace is temporary. Orders soon arrive. You're to remain in Greece as an occupation force. You'll guard supply depots, Patrol roads and watch for insurgents. The officers call it a rest period. The veterans call it a curse. For the Greeks, the war isn't over. It's only changing shape. Resistance groups are already forming in the hills. The same mountains that defeated the Italians will soon shelter partisans who'll fight both occupiers, Italian and German, alike. You look up at those peaks, gleaming under the late spring sun, and feel a strange kinship with them. They've seen empires rise and crumble. They'll see yours fade too. The campaign that began with Mussolini's boast, "We'll be in Athens in 2 weeks," has ended 6 months later, with Italy limping behind Germany's shadow. The grand dream of conquest has turned into an exhausted whisper, echoing through valleys still littered with rusted helmets and nameless graves. And as you pack your rifle and prepare to march once again, not forward, but in circles, you realize the mountains have already written the final verdict. They don't care who claims victory. They only remember who froze first. You stay behind when the guns fall silent. It's April's end, 1941. The campaign is over, but the war is not. The mud has dried, the snow has melted, and what's left behind looks less like a battlefield and more like a vast, open cemetery. The Italians now occupy Greece, though, as one officer dryly remarks, you can't occupy what someone else already conquered for you. Your company is assigned to Epirus, a harsh stretch of rocky hills and silent villages where the wind never stops moving. Orders are vague. Maintain order, assist reconstruction, secure supply routes. In plain terms, it means try not to embarrass Rome further. The Greek soldiers you fought only weeks ago are prisoners now, gaunt and silent. Some even help repair the roads, their faces expressionless as they drag stones through dust. You watch them sometimes and wonder who actually won. A landscape of ghosts. Everywhere you look, the land bears scars. Burned farms, craters, half-sunk artillery pieces with grass growing around their wheels. When the thaw came, it revealed more than spring flowers. It revealed what the snow had hidden. Boots sticking out of the soil. The outlines of trenches filled in by rain. Twisted dog tags hanging from fence posts. A Greek shepherd passing through your checkpoint points at the mountains and says quietly, "They keep the dead." You don't know enough Greek to answer, but you understand perfectly. At night, the valleys are filled with a strange quiet that isn't peace. Sometimes, the wind rushes through the passes, and you'd swear it carries voices, snatches of shouting, laughter, even singing. The mountains remember what happened here. Maybe they always will. The occupation routine. The occupation begins with absurd optimism. Mussolini's representatives talk of rebuilding the friendship of two Mediterranean peoples. Italian engineers arrive to patch roads, and army doctors open field hospitals for civilians. Posters go up in Athens showing smiling soldiers handing out bread. But out here in Epirus, far from the cameras, the reality is less elegant. Supply convoys still struggle through mud. Partisan attacks begin within weeks. The same goat paths that the Greeks used to ambush you in winter now hide resistance fighters. They know the terrain better than ever. You and your squad are ordered to patrol each morning. 8 men, single file, rifles ready. The villages you pass through are polite but cold. Women draw water in silence. Old men stare without expression. The children are the only ones who speak, though not to you. They whisper to each other, eyes bright with quiet defiance. Sometimes you see messages scratched into walls or carved into trees. Zito I Elada, long live Greece. One sergeant jokes, at least the graffiti's well spelled. But no one laughs. Propaganda and pretending. Rome broadcasts victory parades on the radio. Marching bands, speeches, the Duce proclaiming, "Italy has triumphed over barbarism." It sounds hollow, even through static. The announcer mentions the courage of our soldiers in conquering the rugged Hellenic terrain. You look around, at the Greeks watching you, at the Germans strutting through the markets, and realize that the only thing Italy truly conquered was its own pride. Still, propaganda marches on. Photographers come through in May, snapping pictures of Italian troops handing candy to Greek children. They pose your squad in front of a restored bridge, smiling under the caption, "Engineers of Civilization." You force a grin because refusing would mean trouble. The next week, you find the photo in an Italian newspaper, cropped so the German officer standing behind you has vanished. A convenient fiction. Historians later call it Mussolini's illusion of recovery. On the ground, it's just tedium and tension. The Germans take charge. The Germans waste no time reminding everyone who's really in control. Their officers take the best buildings for headquarters, the best supplies for their convoys, and the best positions for their garrisons. Italian units are treated like auxiliary forces, useful but expendable. You see it in small humiliations. A German sergeant barking orders at your captain, or Wehrmacht mechanics refusing to share spare parts. Even the locals sense the hierarchy. When a Greek farmer must salute, he looks past you to the man with the iron cross on his collar. One afternoon, a German colonel visits your outpost. He inspects the barracks, nods once, and says, "At least you keep the floors clean." Then he adds, "Perhaps next time you'll also keep the borders clean before we must intervene." The translator doesn't dare soften the words. Your lieutenant clenches his jaw and says nothing. That night, over rations, someone mutters, "We're Rome's sons treated like Rome's servants." Another replies, "At least the Romans actually conquered Greece." The human side. Amid humiliation, there are still moments of grace. You learn to barter with the villagers. Soap for bread, tobacco for cheese. A widow brings you figs once a week. You fix her roof in return. She never smiles, but she nods politely each time. One evening, you meet a local priest who speaks a little Italian. He invites you for coffee in his stone house, where an icon lamp flickers beside a cracked wall. He says, "War passes. Mountains stay." Remember that. You nod, because you have nothing wiser to offer. There's talk among the troops about fraternization rules, about discipline and maintaining authority. But rules crumble like plaster when you've spent months starving together. Friendships, or something like them, begin to form quietly. You share cigarettes with Greek farmers. You teach a boy to say, "Buongiorno." He laughs when he mispronounces it, and the sound makes something in your chest loosen. You start to think, maybe history isn't only about nations. Maybe it's just about people surviving each other. Restless shadows. But the war refuses to stay quiet. By summer, the resistance grows bolder. Trains are sabotaged, bridges blown, patrols ambushed. The Germans respond with brutality. The Italians, caught between fear and conscience, try to look the other way. You hear gunfire at night and pretend it's thunder. One morning, your patrol finds a German truck burned on the roadside. The colonel arrives hours later, furious, and demands retaliation. Your captain hesitates. The Germans don't. By dusk, a nearby village is in flames. You help carry water buckets even as orders forbid it. That night, you can't sleep. The priest's words echo in your head. War passes. Mountains stay. You wonder what will remain of the people who live in them. Letters from home. Mail arrives sporadically, damp and wrinkled. Your mother writes, "Rome says you are a hero." You laugh out loud for the first time in months. Another letter from your brother describes rationing, air raids, and long queues for bread. Italy, it seems, is starving while pretending to dine on victory. You write back, carefully. "We're safe. The weather is beautiful. Tell Mama not to worry." You don't mention the burned villages or the fact that German planes now patrol the very skies where Italian ones once tried and failed. Historians often note that this was the moment when Italian morale truly broke. Not in defeat, but in the hollow quiet of false victory. Men who survived the mountains now faced a different kind of freezing, a spiritual one, the weight of memory. One afternoon, as summer deepens, you hike to a ridge overlooking the valley where your unit fought months earlier. The snow has gone, the grass has returned, wildflowers grow among rusted helmets. You find an old trench, half collapsed, filled with rainwater and tadpoles. Nature, it seems, has started to erase what men carved in blood. You sit there for a while listening to the wind. It's gentle now, no longer carrying the smell of cordite. Somewhere below, a shepherd sings. The melody is old and slow, almost like a prayer. You think about the Italians who never left these hills, about the Greeks who defended them, about the absurd chain of pride, politics, and stupidity that dragged you all here. And for the first time, you whisper, not to any god or general, but to the mountains themselves. We've learned. They don't answer, of course. Mountains never do. But in the silence that follows, there's a faint sense of absolution, or maybe just wind through pine. Echoes of consequence. The campaign's legacy is larger than anyone here understands. Hitler's diversion to Greece has delayed his invasion of Russia by several vital weeks. By the time German tanks reach the outskirts of Moscow, winter has already begun. Historians will later draw a straight line from Mussolini's vanity in October 1940 to the frozen fields outside Moscow in December 1941. You don't know any of that yet. You only know that you've survived something meaningless that somehow mattered. War, you realize, doesn't end when the shooting stops. It lingers in the soil, in the stories, in the tired eyes of men who once believed they could conquer mountains. And so, when your captain orders another patrol the next morning, you shoulder your rifle without complaint. You trudge down the same paths you once invaded, past fields now blooming again. The air smells of wet stone and time. Somewhere, a bell tolls for morning prayers. You walk on, one step at a time, knowing that the only real victory left is returning home alive and remembering what not to repeat. The mountains watch, as they always do, silent, eternal, and utterly unimpressed. By midsummer 1941, the heat presses down over Epirus like a punishment. The snow that once devoured men has turned to dust that clogs lungs and rifles alike. You've traded frostbite for sunburn, but the fatigue feels the same. Every sound, the clatter of boots, the creak of trucks, the droning flies, seems amplified by the emptiness of victory. Your orders now are dull and endless. Patrol, report, requisition. The war that once roared has become paperwork written in sweat. Yet the countryside hums with a quiet rebellion. The Greeks no longer fight in lines. They fight in whispers. At first, the resistance looks like nothing at all. A missing rifle here, a sabotaged telegraph wire there. But by July, whole supply columns vanish into ravines. Italian patrols disappear on mountain roads that yesterday were safe. It's the same terrain that humbled Mussolini's armies months before, now turned against them once again. You can feel it in the air. The land itself resents you. The whispering hills. One morning, you march through a gorge choked with wild fig trees. The cicadas scream so loud it feels like the world is vibrating. Suddenly, a single rifle cracks from somewhere high above. The sound bounces between cliffs like a ghost. A bullet hits the lead truck and chaos erupts. Men scatter for cover. Someone yells orders that no one hears. You press yourself against a rock face, heart hammering, listening for another shot. Nothing. Just the echo fading into the heat. When the dust settles, you find the bullet lodged in a tire. No casualties, just fear. Still, everyone feels watched. A rumor spreads that the mountains themselves are cursed, that the ghosts of Greek soldiers have returned as avengers. It's superstition, but it feels true. The resistance fighters, Andartes, the locals call them, seem to vanish into the cliffs like smoke. They move at night, strike convoys, free prisoners, melt away before dawn. You rarely see them, but their presence is everywhere, in missing crates, in burned bridges, in the nervous silence of villages that once greeted you politely. German iron, Italian shadows. The Germans don't take kindly to sabotage. Their response is swift, brutal, and always public. One explosion on a railway line means a dozen civilians hanged by sundown. You're often ordered to stand guard during these examples. It's supposed to deter rebels. All it does is hollow you out a little more each time. You remember one afternoon outside the town of Kanitsa. A German officer orders 10 villagers to be executed after a patrol vanishes. You're told to assist to form the perimeter. The condemned men stand barefoot, heads high. One of them looks straight at you, not with hatred, but pity. It's unbearable. Afterward, you light a cigarette and find your hands shaking. Your comrade mutters, "We've become our own punishment." You don't disagree. Historians still argue how much the Italian army resisted or cooperated in such atrocities. The truth, as always, is tangled. Some officers obeyed. Some looked away. A few warned villages ahead of time. The line between cowardice and compassion blurred until no one could tell them apart. A failing occupation. By autumn, Italy's occupation of Greece is already fraying. Supplies from Rome grow scarce. Coal, food, medicine. The German war effort devours everything first. Your rations shrink to a handful of pasta and black bread. When winter returns, you realize how cruelly familiar hunger feels. The civilians starve faster. You see mothers trading heirlooms for flour, priests boiling weeds into soup. The Italians try to distribute aid, but corruption eats it before it reaches the villages. Trucks arrive full and leave mysteriously light. Every crate that disappears spawns another partisan cell. Meanwhile, German officers lecture about discipline. They call the Italians sentimental, unfit for empire. One sneers that Rome built roads, we build order. You want to tell him that roads crumble and order dies screaming, but you keep your mouth shut. At night, you lie awake and wonder what empire even means when your stomach growls and your conscience does too. Letters never delivered. You keep writing home, though the postal routes are unreliable. Things are calm, you lie, describing landscapes instead of events. The olive trees are beautiful. The people are kind. In truth, olive groves have become hiding places for snipers, and the people's kindness has curdled into endurance. Your mother's replies arrive months late, sometimes censored, sometimes torn. One reads, "We hear the war will be over soon." You smile at that, a small mercy of ignorance. Another ends with, "Be proud, my son. You serve history." You fold the letter and think, "No, Mama. History serves no one." One night, your friend Carlo burns his own letters. "If I don't come back," he says, "I don't want her to read the truth." The firelight flickers across his face, and for a second, you imagine both of you as old men, telling stories to grandchildren who won't believe any of this. Then the flame dies, and so does the dream. An uneasy winter. By December, snow dusts the ridges again. The mountains remember. Patrols shorten because frostbite claims more men than ambushes. The resistance keeps moving, now armed with British weapons dropped by parachute. You find empty canisters stamped RAF in a ravine and realize the circle of humiliation is complete. You're fighting British rifles supplied to the Greeks because of a German invasion that began because of Italy's failure. Sometimes, when the wind is right, you hear music from far-off villages. It's the same defiant songs you once heard on Greek radios. National hymns played softly so as not to invite reprisals. You envy their courage. Italy's songs sound hollow now, their lyrics about glory drowned by the static of reality. There's a saying among the men, "The Duce promised us Rome. We got Thermopylae." The younger ones laugh bitterly. The older ones just stare into their soup tins. A scholar's lens. Years later, historians will marvel at the absurd logistics of the Greek campaign and its occupation. Italy deployed over 500,000 men to control a land that never wanted them. In the process, it drained its treasury, crippled its army, and forced Germany into the Balkans, a detour that delayed the invasion of the Soviet Union by crucial weeks. In this sense, Mussolini's pride may have helped decide the war's ultimate outcome, but you, standing ankle-deep in snow by a broken telegraph pole, don't think in grand narratives. You just want to go home. You've stopped believing in empire, in destiny, even in the idea that history makes sense. The only thing you trust anymore is the wind. A brief truce. In January 1942, the strangest thing happens. A snowfall so heavy that both sides pause fighting. Roads vanish, radio lines die, and for 3 days the world is white silence. You find yourself sharing shelter with 2 Greek villagers and a stray mule. You exchange no words, only gestures, fire, food, warmth. When the snow clears, they leave without goodbye, and you let them. For a fleeting moment, it feels like the war forgot you existed. Later, you'll wonder if peace is always this simple, just the absence of orders. The war beyond. But Europe keeps burning. You hear fragments of news through crackling radio. German advances in Russia, Rommel in Africa, British bombings in Milan. The world turns, dragging you with it. The men start to bet on how long before everything collapses. 6 months, says one. A year, says another. You say nothing, because you've stopped measuring time. You've also stopped caring about rank. Captains are just men with better boots. Generals are voices that never echo this far into the hills. You live from ration to ration, from sunrise to sunset. The war has shrunk to its barest dimensions. Cold, hunger, waiting, and unexpected kindness. One evening, a local girl appears outside the post. Thin, maybe 15, carrying a basket of bread. She says her mother sends thanks for repairing the village bridge. Your lieutenant eyes her suspiciously, but she insists it's just bread. You take it, tear off a piece, and hand the rest back. She smiles, just barely, and says in halting Italian, "Maybe peace soon?" You nod. Maybe. Then she's gone, vanishing down the path like a ghost made of sunlight and dust. You stand there a long while, thinking that if peace has a face, it probably looks like that. Brief, fragile, and vanishing too soon. The long reflection. Months later, when your unit is finally rotated back toward Albania, you look behind you at the jagged skyline of Epirus. The peaks glow gold in the setting sun. For the first time, you understand why the Greeks fought so hard for this land. It isn't rich, but it's theirs, and that makes it priceless. You can almost laugh, thinking how the whole catastrophe began. One man's envy, one map on a marble table, one arrogant dream of conquest. From that spark came avalanches of mud, frost, and blood. Historians will later analyze strategies, weapons, troop movements, but none of them will capture the sound of sleet hitting helmets, the stench of wet wool, or the look in a Greek prisoner's eyes when he realized you were just as cold, just as lost. That's the truth no textbook can teach. Empires don't collapse when they lose wars. They collapse when their soldiers stop believing in the reason they're fighting. You shoulder your pack one last time and start walking toward the border, boots crunching in thawing snow. Each step feels lighter, though you know the guilt will travel with you. Somewhere behind, the wind picks up again, sweeping through valleys still littered with the relics of ambition. It sounds, for a moment, almost like applause. Soft, forgiving, endless. The war drags on, stretching itself thin like a thread that refuses to snap. By 1942, you're back in Albania, assigned to a garrison near the coast. The mountains still loom behind you, gray, watchful, indifferent. But now the sea lies ahead, glimmering under an uncaring sun. You'd think being near water would feel like freedom. It doesn't. It feels like waiting. Your unit's job is to guard supply lines feeding the occupation zones in Greece. Trucks rumble up the coast. Soldiers slouch in the dust. And every few days, another name is added to the list of men missing en route. The Greeks aren't done fighting. They've just changed uniforms. The Andartes, partisans, move at night, planting mines, ambushing convoys, disappearing before dawn. You never see them, only what they leave behind. Burnt trucks, boot prints, and silence. The air smells of salt and diesel. You try to convince yourself the war is far away now, that it's something happening on a radio. But every time you see a German officer step off a plane or a truck full of wounded arrive from somewhere called Stalingrad, you're reminded that the storm is still everywhere. The Hollow Empire. Italy still pretends to be a great power. Mussolini gives speeches about the invincible Latin will and the destiny of civilization. You've stopped listening. Everyone has. The soldiers tune the radio to foreign stations when no officers are around. Sometimes you hear British broadcasts in perfect Italian, listing Italian defeats with an almost polite sadness. You'd think that hearing the enemy's voice would make you angry. Instead, it makes you feel seen. Like someone, somewhere, understands what's happening, that the lies aren't the whole story. Historians later call this the slow unraveling of the Italian military. It wasn't just supply shortages or bad strategy. It was a spiritual collapse. The soldiers no longer believed in what they were doing. And without belief, even rifles grow heavier. German shadows. The Germans, on the other hand, still believe in something. You see it in their posture, in their efficient cruelty. They treat the Balkans as a machine to be dismantled and rebuilt in their image. Italian officers try to keep up, but it's like watching bureaucrats chase wolves. One day, a German colonel visits your outpost, demanding access to the fuel depot. Your captain hesitates. Rome had ordered the fuel reserved for Italian transport. The colonel simply smiles and says, "Rome is very far from here." Then his men take what they want. That's how things work now. The Axis is an alliance only on maps. In the field, it's a hierarchy, and you're near the bottom. Later, at the canteen, one of your comrades mutters, "The Germans fight like gods, but they think like accountants." He's not wrong. To them, war is just numbers, and you're one of the smaller ones. The letter you don't send. You start another letter to your mother. You write about the sea, the markets, the sunsets, things that don't scream war. You want her to think you're safe, that her son is far from the noise. Then you stop mid-sentence. You don't know how to explain what safe even means anymore. There's no artillery here, no frozen passes, but the silence feels heavier than gunfire. You stare at the paper until the ink blurs, then fold it carefully and put it away. Maybe someday you'll know what to say. Whispers of change. By 1943, everything is falling apart. The Germans are bleeding in Russia. The Americans have landed in North Africa. Rumors swirl that Sicily might be next. Soldiers trade gossip like currency. The Duce will surrender. Hitler's furious. The Allies will bomb Rome. Each rumor sounds plausible because hope and fear have become indistinguishable. The Greek resistance grows stronger. They've organized under names now. ELAS, EDES. Armies of ghosts in patched uniforms. They know your patrol schedules, your passwords, your weak spots. Some locals warn you quietly when ambushes are coming. Others smile politely and say nothing. You don't blame them. You wouldn't trust occupiers either. Every so often, a message comes down from headquarters. Be vigilant. Maintain morale. You can almost hear the paper laugh as it's read aloud. The collapse begins. Then, in July 1943, everything changes. News crackles over the radio like thunder. Benito Mussolini has been arrested. Marshal Badoglio takes command. Italy will continue the war. The officers stare at each other, stunned. Continue the war? For whom? Some soldiers cheer, others weep. You just sit there, feeling something immense shift beneath your feet. The Duce, who promised empire, is gone. The empire itself is already ashes. 2 months later, the real blow falls. September 8th, 1943. The armistice of Cassibile. Italy surrenders to the Allies. Rome announces an end to hostilities with the Anglo-Americans. No one knows what that means for you. At your post in Albania, chaos erupts overnight. The Germans move instantly. They seize weapons, disarm Italian units, shoot anyone who resists. The alliance dissolves in gunfire. The night of betrayal. You remember that night in fragments, shouting, headlights slicing through darkness, a German officer ordering everyone to lay down their arms. Someone refuses. The first burst of machine gun fire tears through the courtyard. You dive behind a wall, heart hammering. When it's over, the Germans have taken the depot and half your comrades are gone. In the morning, the survivors face a choice: surrender and join the German army, flee into the hills and join the partisans, or wait and hope someone remembers you exist. You choose the last option. For now, you bury your uniform insignia under a rock, not out of treason, but exhaustion. Italy itself has surrendered. What loyalty is left to serve? Between enemies, the days blur together. Some Italians flee to the mountains, joining Greek resistance fighters against the Germans. Others are captured, loaded onto trains, sent north as prisoners. Or worse, you hear stories of massacres. Entire Italian divisions shot after surrendering. The word Cefalonia becomes a whispered curse. You hide in a fishing village for a while, trading your rifle for food. The locals don't trust you, but they feed you anyway. Not all Italians are Mussolini, an old woman says, pouring you water. Her kindness feels heavier than any accusation. When German patrols pass through, you keep your head down and pretend to be a dock worker. Some nights, you help smugglers move refugees across the bay. You don't do it for politics. You do it because you can't stand being idle while others risk everything. The end of the line. In late 1944, word reaches you that the Germans are retreating. The Allies have landed in Italy proper, and the fascist republic in the north is crumbling. The occupation forces begin to pull out of Greece, leaving behind ruins, graves, and debts no treaty will ever repay. You walk one last time through a valley you once fought in. It's quiet now, green again. The trenches are filled with flowers. The trees have grown around broken artillery like they're reclaiming their lost limbs. A shepherd greets you with a nod, as if the war never happened. Maybe for him it hasn't. Maybe it's just another chapter in a story too long to remember. You realize then that the land has already forgiven what men never will. Returning, when you finally make it back to Italy in 1945, the country feels smaller, emptier. Cities lie in ruins. People move like shadows. The Duce's statues are gone, toppled by the same crowds that once cheered him. Your family is alive somehow. Your mother doesn't ask what you did. She just touches your face and says, "You're home." And for the first time in years, you let yourself believe it. But at night, when you hear rain on the roof, you still think of the Pindus Mountains, the sound of wind through snow, the cries of men, the frozen silence that followed. You realize you'll never really leave that place. Part of you is still there, buried under ice and mud and memory. Legacy. Historians will later compress it all into neat sentences. The Italian invasion of Greece was repelled due to poor planning and logistics. German intervention in April 1941 led to Greek capitulation. But the real story isn't on any map. It's in the mud, in the hunger, in the absurdity of men freezing for a dream no one understood. It's in the way both sides sometimes stopped shooting just to share silence. If anyone ever asked you what it was like, you'll tell them this: it was cold, it was endless, it was pointless. And yet, somehow, it mattered, because it showed how small even empires are when measured against a single mountain. You pause, take a long breath, and for the first time in years, the air doesn't smell like war. Maybe, finally, the world has learned to sleep again. When you return to the front in 1945, it's not really a front anymore. It's a collection of shattered loyalties wearing whatever uniforms still fit. Italy is divided. The Allies control the south, the Germans the north, and what remains in between is chaos pretending to be order. You're not sure when you stopped being a soldier and became something else. Maybe it was the night you hid from both sides in a burned farmhouse. Maybe it was the morning you realized that the flag you once saluted no longer meant anything. Either way, you march again, not because anyone orders you to, but because standing still feels like drowning. The world rearranges itself. The newspapers call it liberation. The word sounds clean, like sunlight and new beginnings. But here in the ruins of Europe, it looks like rubble, black bread, and displaced faces. Italy has changed sides. Germany is collapsing. And Greece, poor, battered Greece, is tearing itself apart in civil war. You read the headlines one morning and think, we started this fire, and now we're standing downwind of it. Historians will later describe this moment as a geopolitical reshuffling, a power vacuum, a realignment. You just call it confusion. Postcards from the end. The Allied radio reports victories with cheerful precision. Athens liberated, Rome secured, Berlin under siege. You can almost believe it until you look around and see that liberation doesn't mean peace. The Greek resistance movements, once united against the Axis, have turned their guns on each other. Villages burn again, this time for new flags. From afar, Italy celebrates the end of fascism. In the cities, parades fill the streets. In the countryside, there's silence. Everyone's too busy burying someone. You still keep your mother's last letter in your pack. The ink has bled, the paper soft as fabric. When the war is over, she wrote, promise you'll come home and plant tomatoes again. You whisper to yourself, if the soil still remembers me. The trial of memory. When you finally make it home, the town looks smaller. The bell tower leans. The train station is gone. The neighbors recognize you but don't know what to say. Everyone has lost someone, so no one asks questions anymore. You rebuild a life out of routine. Morning coffee, afternoon work in the fields, evenings spent staring at the horizon, half expecting to see columns of smoke again. Sometimes you dream of Greece. Not the battles, the quiet moments, the frozen trench before dawn, the mountain air that smelled of pine and gunpowder, the look on a Greek prisoner's face when you shared your last cigarette. Historians can debate causes and consequences all they like, but for you, war has shrunk to memories of weather and faces. Everything else is noise. The historians arrive. By the 1950s, young men with notebooks start visiting the veterans. They ask for stories, how the invasion was planned, where the battles took place, what you thought of Mussolini. They're polite, eager, too clean. You tell them what you can, though they always seem disappointed. They want drama, you give them mud. They want heroism, you give them hunger. They want strategy, you give them the sound of boots freezing to the ground. One of them, a university student from Athens, asks gently, do you feel guilty? You think about it. I feel tired, you say. Maybe that's the same thing. He writes it down as if it's poetry. You almost laugh. A world rebuilt on forgetting. Europe rebuilds fast. Too fast. Concrete buries memory. Highways cover trenches. New governments rewrite the narrative. Italy becomes a democracy. Greece joins NATO. Children grow up learning about the Axis blunders and the heroic Greek resistance. Neat phrases for things that were anything but neat. Museums open. Exhibits display rusted helmets behind glass, as if that makes them safe. Tourists hike the Pindus Mountains now, following World War II heritage trails. They take selfies where your comrades froze to death. You watch a travel documentary one night and see the same valleys you once bled in. The narrator calls them breathtakingly serene. You mutter, they weren't always. Letters never written. There are things you never tell anyone. About the night you almost deserted. About the faces you can't remember because you were too numb to look. About the priest who forgave you without knowing what for. Sometimes you imagine writing to the families of the Greeks who died. I was there. I saw how brave they were. But what good would that do now? The dead don't need apologies, and the living have moved on. So you write letters to no one, just to empty them from your mind. You burn them afterward. The ashes drift out the window and vanish into the evening air, like they've been waiting all this time to go home too. Reflections on the mountains. One spring, decades later, you visit Greece again. You're an old man now, knees aching, eyes fogged, but curiosity still burns where pride once lived. You stand at the foot of a ridge that once held the Italian line. The guidebook calls it a site of resistance glory. You don't correct it. You just listen to the wind sweeping through the pines. It sounds the same as it did that first night in 1940. There's a memorial nearby, Greek, modest, clean. Names carved in marble, flowers at the base. You trace one with your fingers and whisper, "We were all fools." A local caretaker hears you. He smiles kindly and says, "Maybe fools, but necessary ones." You nod. You're not sure if he's right, but you want to believe him. How history judges. When historians write about this war, they focus on its absurdity. How an empire with airplanes and tanks was humbled by farmers with mules and mountains. They analyze Mussolini's ego, Badoglio's hesitations, Hitler's intervention. They rarely mention the ordinary men who froze on both sides, the ones who carried the rifles, not the ideologies. But that's always been history's cruelty. It remembers the speeches and forgets the silence between them. You once read that a civilization is judged not by its victories, but by what it chooses to remember. If that's true, then Italy's lesson lies in the mountains of Epirus, an empire humbled by its own illusions, a nation forced to learn humility the hard way. The modern echo. Years later, school books will call it the Greek campaign, a short prelude to larger battles. Students will memorize dates, not feelings. Yet every October 28th, Ojai Day, Greece still celebrates its defiance. Children march with flags, shouting the word their ancestors used to reject Mussolini's ultimatum: no. You watch a news clip of it one morning, tears sliding down wrinkles you didn't know you had. The Greeks still remember. The Italians, perhaps, still try to forget. And in that difference lies the entire story, the weight of truth. If someone asked you now, after all these years, what the lesson was, you'd tell them it's this: never invade a people who love their land more than you love your leader. Never start a war you expect someone else to finish for you. Never confuse propaganda with courage. You say these things quietly, to no one in particular, because the world has moved on. But maybe, somewhere, a young listener will hear it in the wind, the same way you once heard ghosts in the mountains. The last night, in your final dream, you're back there again, not in battle, but in the silence after it. The snow glows under moonlight. The sky hums with distant artillery that never reaches you. You walk alone along a ridge and find your old trench, now filled with water clear as glass. You look down and see your reflection, young, tired, unbroken. You smile. We made it, after all. A breeze stirs the surface, erasing the image. The mountains sigh, eternal and patient. And then there's only quiet, pure, endless, forgiving quiet. The years blur. The world keeps moving, but your memories stay fixed, like photographs too stubborn to fade. You live in a small village now, tucked between hills that could almost be Italian if you squint. Each morning, you drink coffee strong enough to wake ghosts, then sit by the window and watch the sunlight creep over the fields. Life has become a rhythm of quiet habits, the kind that people mistake for peace. But peace isn't silence. It's just the absence of noise loud enough to drown your thoughts. Sometimes, in the long afternoons, you still hear the crackle of old radios. You keep one by your chair, an antique from the war years. You twist the dial until the static fades into distant voices. News from Athens, Berlin, London, the same cities that once burned now discuss trade agreements and tourism. The same rivers that ran red now sell postcards. Civilization, it seems, has a short memory. You don't resent it. Forgetting is how the world survives. The weight of routine. You found small ways to stay busy. You repair clocks. People bring them from miles around, rusted, broken, stopped at strange hours. You sit by lamplight, bent over the gears, coaxing time to move again. It's almost holy work in a way, helping time heal itself. One afternoon, a boy from town asks why you bother. "No one cares if an old clock works," he says. You smile. "That's what they said about me." He laughs, thinking it's a joke. You let him think so. There's something comforting about these tiny machines. They remind you that even chaos has cogs, and if you're patient enough, everything can be put back in motion, even a life. Visitors from the future. Sometimes, students still come, usually history majors clutching notebooks and idealism. They ask the same questions the earlier ones did, just in newer clothes. Was it really as cold as they say? Did you believe in Mussolini? Were the Greeks really so brave? You answer honestly, though your answers never satisfy. Yes, it was cold enough to freeze tears mid-fall. No, you didn't believe in Mussolini. You believed in the man next to you, and sometimes not even him. And yes, the Greeks were brave, but bravery isn't what wins wars. It's what survives losing them. One girl, barely 20, listens longer than most. She asks, "If you could change one thing, what would it be?" You think for a long while before answering. I'd tell the young men to question orders before they march. Once your boots touch foreign soil, it's already too late. She writes it down with trembling hands. You wonder if she'll remember it when the world gives her its own war. The return to the mountains. It happens by chance. A veterans association invites you to a commemoration in Greece. You almost decline, but something tugs at you, a whisper from the past. So you pack a small bag, the same way soldiers do when they know they'll never need much. The journey is long, familiar. The ferry smells of diesel and sea salt. The hills grow sharper as you near the mainland, until the landscape itself feels like memory rising from the earth. At Ioannina, they greet you with reeds and polite applause. A local choir sings the Greek anthem. An Italian delegation responds with their own. The two melodies overlap awkwardly, but not unpleasantly, history trying, clumsily, to harmonize. A young Greek officer helps you up a flight of stone steps to a memorial overlooking the Pindus Range. The plaque reads, "To all who fought here, whatever their flag." You stand there, eyes watering in the wind. It's the most honest sentence you've ever seen carved into stone. The ceremony. The speeches are mercifully short. Officials talk about shared suffering, European unity, and lessons learned. Cameras click, wreaths are laid, doves are released, though one refuses to fly, just waddles in circles before someone quietly picks it up. You think, that one's Italian. When it's over, the crowd disperses into the village for wine and songs. You stay behind, leaning on your cane, watching the shadows crawl down the slopes. You whisper to the empty air, "We're back, you stubborn rocks." We brought flowers this time, and for the first time in decades, you feel lighter. An evening conversation. That night, in a small inn, you share dinner with a Greek veteran, Nicholas, 83, with hands like leather and eyes like dusk. You toast with cheap red wine that tastes like memory. "We were enemies once," he says. "Only on paper," you reply. He grins. "Yes, the mountains didn't care whose bullets they carried." You talk for hours. He tells you about the famine during occupation, about the partisans, about losing his brother near Klissura Pass. You tell him about frostbite, about letters home that never made it, about the Italian soldiers who went missing and were never found. At the end, he raises his glass. "To the fools who thought they could conquer Greece." You laugh, and the sound feels young again. Ghosts in the dark. Later, unable to sleep, you step outside. The moon spills silver over the peaks, the same peaks that nearly swallowed you. You close your eyes and, for a heartbeat, hear them again. Voices carried by wind, the crack of rifles, the bark of orders, the ragged breath of men climbing through snow. When you open your eyes, the hills are still and silent. The ghosts are gone. Maybe they've forgiven you, or maybe they've simply moved on to quieter dreams. You take a long breath of that cold mountain air. It doesn't smell like gunpowder anymore. It smells like pine, rain, and time. History's long shadow. The next day, before you leave, a Greek school teacher approaches you. She's organizing her students for the ceremony's closing walk. "You fought here, didn't you?" she asks. You nod. She hesitates, then says, "My grandfather was in that war too. He used to say the Italians weren't our enemies. They were just lost men following the wrong map." You want to tell her how true that is, but your throat tightens. So you just whisper, "We were all lost." She smiles gently. "Then maybe we all found something too." You don't answer, but you think she might be right. Maybe the point was never victory or defeat, just surviving long enough to learn humility. The journey home. On the way back, the ferry rocks gently against the waves. You sit on deck, coat wrapped tight, watching seagulls glide above the wake. The sea looks endless, but you know better. It always leads somewhere. You think of all the men who crossed this water before you, full of songs and slogans, never imagining they'd return decades later as quiet old men searching for meaning. The sun dips low, turning the horizon gold. You whisper, "We thought we were making history. Turns out, we were just making stories." And maybe that's enough. The final reflection. Back home, you hang the wreath ribbon from the ceremony on your wall. It flutters when the windows open, a small, living reminder. Some days you talk to it, the way others talk to saints. When people ask what the war taught you, you tell them that pride is louder than reason, that courage is quieter than memory, and that peace, real peace, isn't signed by governments. It's made by people deciding not to shoot. You pause, then add, "And never start a war in the mountains." They laugh, thinking it's a joke. You let them. An old soldier's prayer. Each night, before bed, you whisper the same words. Not quite a prayer, not quite a confession. For the Greeks who froze beside us. For the Italians who never came home. For the mules that carried our foolishness up the slopes. For the mountains who bore it all and still stand tall. You close your eyes and feel the rhythm of your heartbeat. Slow but steady, like distant drums fading into silence. When sleep finally comes, it's dreamless because there's nothing left to remember that hasn't already been forgiven. And somewhere, far away, the Pindus Mountains breathe, unchanging, unbothered, eternal. They don't keep grudges, they just keep time. The morning after you return from Greece, something in you feels different. Like a weight you didn't know you were carrying has quietly lifted. The war feels further away now, not because of time, but because you finally stood where it ended. You've looked the ghosts in the face and found them calm. You start walking every day, down to the village, past the square, up toward the olive groves. The rhythm of your steps reminds you of the marches, except now, no one's shouting, and the only orders come from the wind moving through the branches. Sometimes, you stop to rest under a tree and close your eyes. The air smells of earth and citrus. You think, this is what victory should have smelled like. The quiet after. Your life has become a collection of gentle sounds. The tick of repaired clocks, the scraping of a chair on stone, the distant chatter from the cafe where people discuss football instead of politics. It's the kind of peace that feels so fragile, you're afraid to breathe too loud in case it breaks. Every so often, a radio segment or newspaper article mentions the war again. The Greek campaign, a study in strategic miscalculation, one headline reads. You skim it, noting the familiar names, Badoglio, Mussolini, Papagos. Each one feels like a photograph, left too long in the sun. Recognizable, but faded around the edges. The article ends with a quote from a British historian. Italy's failure in Greece was less a battle lost than a revelation of unpreparedness. You smile. They're still trying to turn it into theory. For you, it was simpler. It rained, it froze, men died, and no one knew why. A visit from the past. One day, a letter arrives from Nicholas, the Greek veteran you met at the ceremony. His handwriting is neat, looping, deliberate. My friend, the priest of my village, is compiling stories for our children. He wants them to know that even in war, there were moments of decency. I told him about you, the Italian who shared wine with an old fool by the fire. He said such stories are the only kind worth keeping. You hold the letter for a long time, staring at the words, worth keeping. Maybe that's the best any of us can hope for. Not glory, not medals, just to be remembered kindly by one person who might tell the story right. You write back, tell the priest I'm honored. Tell the children we were both very cold. Echoes of the mountains. That night, you dream again of Epirus. Not the fighting, just the landscape. The fog drifts like smoke, but it's gentle this time, almost tender. You see the same mule tracks winding between cliffs, the same ridges where voices once echoed. Only now, the air is clear, the snow clean. You walk the path without fear. At one bend, a young soldier appears ahead, yourself, perhaps 20 years old, rifle slung carelessly, eyes hard and hungry. He doesn't see you, of course. He just trudges past, vanishing into the mist. You want to call out to him, to warn him about everything, but your voice won't come. When you wake, your pillow is damp, and your room smells faintly of rain. The modern world arrives. The world doesn't stop for memory. Cars grow sleeker, buildings taller, and people faster. Your village gets its first supermarket. The old tailor shop becomes a bank. Everyone seems to be chasing something invisible. You watch from your window and think how strange it is. So much movement, so little direction. A neighbor's grandson visits one afternoon showing off a smartphone. You can see the whole world from this, he says proudly, swiping at the glowing screen. You chuckle. I've seen enough of the world, you reply. Didn't look so small when I walked through it. He doesn't quite understand, but he smiles politely. You spend that evening thinking about how people now hold history in their hands. Photos, videos, endless data. And yet somehow, they feel more distant from it than ever. A new generation of forgetting. The next October, a television crew visits the area to film a documentary about the Forgotten Front. They interview locals, historians, even a few surviving veterans. You agree to speak on camera, though the idea makes you uneasy. They set up bright lights and a microphone. The director, young and impatient, says, "Could you tell us what it felt like to fight in Greece?" You take a long breath. Cold, you say finally. Hungry, confused. He waits, expecting more. You add, and very human. The crew looks puzzled. They were hoping for something cinematic. Explosions, drama, redemption. But war, you remind them, is rarely cinematic when you're in it. When the documentary airs, your segment lasts 12 seconds. They cut the pauses, the sighs, the silence between your words. Those were the most important parts. Friendship by post. Nicholas keeps writing. His letters arrive less often now. His handwriting shakier. The winters are harder, he writes, but the olives still grow. I think the mountains like stubborn men. You send him coffee beans and a small clock you repaired yourself. He replies, the clock ticks slowly, like us. One day, his daughter writes instead, Nicholas has passed away, quietly, in his sleep. She says he kept your letters in a tin box by his bedside. You place his last note beside your mother's old letter. 2 pieces of paper, 2 worlds. Both survived their empires. A walk at dusk. You start walking farther again, beyond the village, down to the old river path where the fields meet the hills. Children play football nearby, their laughter rising like birds. You sit on a rock, watching the sun dip low. The sky burns gold, then crimson, then that deep blue that always makes you nostalgic for something unnamed. You realize this is the first time in your life the world has been at peace, truly at peace. And you think, maybe that's enough. You don't need statues or songs. You just need this. Quiet wind, warm light. No orders shouted. No guns waiting to be fired. Reflections at the table. That night, you invite a few neighbors for dinner. Pasta, wine, laughter. The talk turns to the war, as it always does when wine flows. One of the younger men says, they say war makes heroes. You shake your head. War makes survivors. Heroes are the ones who never have to fight. The room falls silent for a moment. Then, someone changes the subject. But later, as they leave, The same young man touches your shoulder and says softly, "My grandfather would have liked that." You nod, smiling. Maybe that's how wisdom passes on, not through speeches, but through small truths, whispered across generations. The final march. You know your body is slowing down. The doctor says your heart is a good soldier, but tired. You laugh. After all, it's been marching for 80 years. You feel no fear. You've already walked through worse. Sometimes you think about the men who never got to grow old. You wonder what they'd make of this world of peace and screens and endless noise. Maybe they'd laugh too. You keep one promise to yourself: to visit the sea one last time. So you do. You sit on the shore, shoes off, letting the tide pull gently at your toes. The horizon glows pink, and gulls call overhead. You whisper, "We made it." And though no one answers, you feel the waves reply, the legacy of quiet men. In the end, your story becomes a footnote in someone else's textbook, a line beneath a map, a name in a veteran's registry. But it doesn't matter, because history isn't just written, it's felt. It lives in gestures, in mercy, in the quiet decision not to hate. If anyone remembers you, let it be for that. The man who once fought a pointless war and then spent a lifetime proving peace could be louder than pride. The clocks in your workshop tick in steady unison. You close your eyes and listen. It's the only sound that's ever truly made sense. Winter returns like an old acquaintance, slowly, quietly, with just enough chill to make you remember the taste of snow in the Pindus Mountains. You wrap yourself in the same heavy coat you've had for decades, the one that's seen more winters than most men see years. It smells faintly of tobacco and oil, your life in scent form. Each evening, you light the small lamp in your workshop, wind the clocks, and sit with your thoughts. You've stopped counting the years. Time has become elastic, stretching, folding, looping back on itself like the gears beneath your hands. You once fought to stop time from running out. Now, you just keep it moving. The unfinished watch. There's one clock you've never managed to fix. A pocket watch you found in the mountains the week after the German advance in 1941. The casing was dented, the glass cracked, the hands frozen at 4:17. You'd carried it all through the occupation, through the retreat, through the peace, promising yourself you'd make it tick again someday. You don't know whose it was. A Greek soldier, perhaps, or one of your own. The initials scratched on the back, PM, mean nothing to you, but you treat them like a name. One night, you take it out again, set it under the lamplight, and begin. The gears are rusted, delicate as memories. Your fingers tremble more now, but you persist. You remove the backplate, polish the spring, reset the balance. When you finally wind it, it stirs, a faint tick, hesitant, then steady. You smile. "Welcome back," you whisper. For a moment, you swear you hear other ticks joining it, the echo of countless lost watches that stopped in the cold of 1940. Time, you think, never really dies. It just waits for someone patient enough to listen. The unexpected visitor. One morning, as frost glitters on the window, there's a knock at your door. A young man stands there, dressed neatly, holding a camera bag. "Signore," he says in halting Italian. "I'm from Thessaloniki University. I'm writing my thesis about the Italo-Greek War. May I ask you some questions?" You study him for a moment, nervous, earnest, eyes too full of purpose. You nod. "Come in, but if you're looking for glory, you won't find it here." He smiles shyly. "I'm looking for the truth." You sigh. "That's even harder." He sits at your kitchen table, notebook ready. His recorder clicks on. "Tell me," he says, "what was it like to invade my country?" The question isn't hostile, just painfully honest. You appreciate that. You pour 2 cups of coffee and answer, "It was like trying to march into a storm and call it sunshine." He blinks. "Excuse me?" You stir your coffee. "We thought we were bringing civilization. Instead, the mountains civilized us." He writes that down quickly, nodding. What you tell him. You tell him about the first night in Albania, the sleet, the broken trucks, the smell of wet wool, about the Greek counterattack, about the faces of men you never saw again. You describe the cold so vividly, his hands start to shake, as if the chill has reached across the decades. He asks, "Did you hate us?" You shake your head. "No, you can't hate someone who's fighting for their home. We were the ones out of place." He hesitates. "Then why did you come?" You look at him for a long time, then say, "Because pride makes men deaf. And dictators know how to shout." He doesn't write that down. He just looks at you, silent. When he leaves, he thanks you, bows slightly, and says, "My grandfather fought there. He never forgave the Italians." You nod. "Tell him some of us never forgave ourselves." He pauses, then says softly, "I think he would have liked you." When the door closes, you stand there a while, hand on the pocket watch ticking faintly in your vest. Time has a way of forgiving what men can't. Remnants of an empire. Later that week, the newspaper runs a feature about 80 years since the Greek campaign. You skim it over breakfast. There are photos of Mussolini, Hitler, maps with arrows and dotted lines. One caption reads, "Italy's failed attempt to assert dominance paved the way for German involvement in the Balkans." You shake your head. Such clean phrasing for such dirty business. There's a quote from a modern historian. "The war in Greece remains a cautionary tale about overconfidence and poor logistics." You laugh softly. They forgot to mention stupidity. You clip the article and tuck it into your journal anyway. Someday, some child might find it and ask why an old man kept such a sad story. Maybe they'll notice the coffee stains on the paper and realize history is always a little messy. Winter conversations. In the evenings, you meet friends at the cafe. Other old men who've survived too many governments and outlived all their leaders. You sit by the heater, drinking wine that tastes of rust and memory, trading stories half true and half invented. Johnny still insists he saw Mussolini once, waving from a balcony in Rome. Pietro swears he met a British spy in Athens disguised as a priest. You smile and let them talk. Every generation edits its own history, after all. When they ask about Greece, you tell them the same line every time. "We tried to climb Olympus, but forgot the gods were still home." They always laugh, and you never explain that you weren't joking. The museum invitation. In early spring, you receive a letter, official looking, stamped with the seal of a new war museum in Rome. They're curating an exhibit called Forgotten Fronts, the Italian campaigns of 1940 to 1943. They ask if you'll loan them any artifacts. You open the drawer where the pocket watch rests, still ticking faintly. You hesitate. Then you write back, "You may borrow it, but only if you promise not to clean it. Let it keep its rust. History should smell like the truth." 2 weeks later, a courier arrives to collect it. You place the watch in his gloved hand as if you're handing over a heartbeat. That night, your workshop feels too quiet without it. For the first time, you understand what it means to miss time. Recognition. Months later, the museum sends you a ticket and a note. Your contribution has become one of the most visited pieces in the exhibit. Visitors often stop and listen to its ticking. "Thank you for reminding us that history has a pulse." You smile at that, imagining strangers leaning close to hear the faint rhythm of the past. The watch has finally found an audience more patient than soldiers or politicians. You decide to visit it someday, though not yet. Let others hear it first. The world you leave behind. The seasons pass faster now. Your steps slow, your eyesight blurs, but your mind stays sharp, like a blade carefully kept dull enough to be safe. You still wake early, still make coffee, still talk to the mountains through your open window. Sometimes, you think about how strange it is that a war fought for vanity ended up teaching you humility. You once believed the world could be conquered. Now you know it can only be understood. And even that takes a lifetime. When neighbors stop by, you tell them small stories, not the grand ones. How a mule once stole your bread. How frost glittered on rifle barrels like jewels. How once you traded your last cigarette for a song. They laugh, thinking these are just anecdotes, but they're the whole truth. The only kind of truth worth passing on. The last letter. One quiet night, you write a final note, addressed to no one. If anyone finds this, know that I tried to fix what was broken. Watches, memories, hearts. Sometimes I succeeded, sometimes not. The war taught me one thing: never mistake noise for strength. The loudest men rarely win. The patient ones simply outlast them. You fold the paper and place it beside your tools. Then you sit back, eyes closed, listening to the faint ticking that still fills the room, not from the watch, but from the hundreds of clocks you've repaired over the years. Their rhythm is steady, almost soothing, like rain on rooftops. You whisper, "Keep time for me," and the clocks obey. The last sound. In the morning, the village wakes to the usual sounds: bells, birds, shutters creaking open. Someone notices the old man's door still closed, the lamp still burning in his window. When they enter, they find him seated peacefully, head resting against the chair, a faint smile on his lips. The clocks all tick together, perfectly synchronized. And in the museum in Rome, the pocket watch ticks too, steady, defiant, alive. Its face still reads 4:17, the hour when the past stopped pretending to be glorious and became human again. Morning. The first light spills through the shutters, pale and cold, like a memory made visible. The neighbors move quietly around your workshop, respectful, uncertain. The air smells faintly of oil and coffee. Every clock you ever repaired still ticks, dozens of them, all perfectly in sync, as though time itself has paused to honor you. Someone whispers, "He fixed time, and then he left it." The priest arrives, gentle and dignified. He doesn't speak right away. Instead, he stands by your workbench, tracing a finger across the pocketed dust, the tiny screws, the watchmaker's loop lying exactly where you placed it. "He must have known," the priest says softly. "Look, he wound every clock last night." Outside, the village gathers. They speak in low tones, the way people do when they realize they've lost something irreplaceable, but can't quite name it. You weren't a hero, not by anyone's textbook definition. You weren't famous. You didn't write memoirs or chase recognition. You just endured. And somehow, in a world built on noise, endurance became its own quiet monument. The funeral of a forgotten soldier. They bury you under a cypress tree on the hill above the town. The same one where, years earlier, you once paused on a walk to watch the sunset and say, "Peace is just the sound of the world breathing again." Now the same wind moves through the branches, soft and unhurried. The village band plays not a march, but a waltz, slow, lilting, and slightly imperfect, the kind of music you would have liked. Children from the school carry small olive branches. One of them trips, and everyone smiles. Because even at funerals, life insists on being clumsy. The priest says a few words about humility and craft, about how you restored the pulse of things that had forgotten how to move. Someone, maybe the mayor, reads a line from your last letter, the one they found beside your tools. "Never mistake noise for strength. The loudest men rarely win. The patient ones simply outlast them." No one claps, but everyone nods. It's not a speech to applaud. It's one to remember. The pocket watch returns. Months later, the museum in Rome sends a courier. The letter is brief. Per the donor's wishes, we are returning the timepiece. It was not meant for storage, but for company. The villagers gather to decide what to do. They agree unanimously. The watch should come home to your workshop. It's placed back on your desk, next to the journal and the old brass magnifier. Someone winds it carefully, and as it begins to tick again, they swear the sound blends perfectly with the rhythm of the other clocks. A child asks, "Whose watch was it?" An elder answers, "Everyone's." A generation later, time does what it always does, moves on. The children who carried olive branches that day grow up, leave for cities, start families, forget small details. But every October, they return for a ceremony under the cypress. The teacher reads a short passage from the local history book. One of our villagers, a veteran of the Italian campaign in Greece, spent his life repairing clocks and memories. He taught us that peace is built from patience, not conquest. The story becomes part of the town's identity. Not grand, not tragic, just true. Tourists occasionally stop by your workshop, now a small museum. They peer through glass at your tools, your photos, the pocket watch, still ticking faintly in its case. A guide explains, he fought in a war his country didn't understand. He survived it by learning to listen. And maybe one or two visitors leave that day a little quieter than they came. The scholars return. Decades later, the young historian who once interviewed you, now gray-haired himself, returns to the village. He's spent his career studying forgotten soldiers, the small stories behind grand disasters. He stands in your workshop, hat in hand, overwhelmed by how unchanged it is. Dust has thickened, but nothing feels dead. Time here isn't gone, just folded neatly, waiting. He writes in his notebook, "He told me the mountains civilized us. I think I understand now. They stripped us of our illusions until all that remained was decency." He closes his eyes and listens. The ticking surrounds him. He realizes that every clock here is beating in perfect rhythm, as if still answering to the hand that once set them right. He whispers, "Rest easy, old man. You taught us what history never could." Echoes through generations. Years pass into decades. The world changes again. New wars, new leaders, new certainties pretending to be truth. But in that little workshop, nothing breaks the rhythm. The clocks continue to mark seconds with quiet defiance. Sometimes, a local school holds field trips there. The teacher explains the story, and the children stare, half bored, half awed. One boy asks, "Why did he fix clocks if they just break again?" The teacher smiles, "Because that's what people do when they believe in tomorrow." The boy thinks for a moment, then whispers, "Maybe he fixed the world a little too." A letter never sent. Again. One day, a box arrives from Athens addressed to the heirs of Signore Lorenzo Romano. Inside is a faded photograph, two young soldiers sitting side by side, sharing a canteen. One in Italian uniform, one in Greek. Scrawled on the back in Greek letters are the words, "To my brother, who didn't shoot." No one knows how it found its way there, but the handwriting matches the name scratched on the back of the pocket watch. PM. The village priest hangs the photo beside the clock. Beneath it, he writes a small card. Peace leaves breadcrumbs for the patient. History's revision. Historians, inevitably, revisit the Greek campaign. New books appear, filled with data and declassified documents. They debate whether Mussolini's invasion delayed Operation Barbarossa long enough to alter the war's outcome. Some argue that Italy's failure indirectly saved Europe, but buried in one footnote, somewhere near the back of a 500-page academic tome, there's a single line referencing oral testimonies from Italian veterans who later expressed empathy toward the Greek defenders. The citation, Romano L. Personal Interview, 1992. And just like that, your voice slips back into the official record, not as a number or statistic, but as proof that even inside disaster, there was decency, legacy in motion. The villagers notice something curious over the years. The pocket watch never stops. It has outlived every clock in the workshop, every battery-powered replacement, every museum curator who once handled it. Mechanics inspect it and find nothing remarkable, just a well-made watch, but no one can explain its endurance. They call it Orologio Immortale, the immortal watch. Visitors lean close to hear it, and some swear that its rhythm isn't quite constant. It seems to quicken when people speak softly, to slow when someone laughs, as if, in some quiet mechanical way, it's still listening. What the mountains remember. And far away, in Epirus, the same mountains still stand. Tourists climb the old trails where men once marched and froze. The air is clean, the silence deep. A plaque near Hill 731 reads simply, "Here, courage met futility and still held its ground." When the wind blows right, the grass ripples like waves on the sea. Locals say that's the mountains remembering. They remember everything. The thunder of artillery, the cries, the silence after. But they also remember small mercies, an Italian giving bread to a Greek prisoner, a shared cigarette at dawn, a whispered prayer for both sides. Time erases blood, but not kindness. The wind down. Now, imagine yourself, the listener, closing your eyes. You've followed this story from ambition to ruin, from snow to sunlight, from pride to peace. You've walked with ghosts through mountains and cities, through history and memory, and now all that's left is the quiet ticking of that pocket watch, faint, steady, eternal. Let it slow your heartbeat. Let it remind you that even wars fade, but decency echoes. So breathe in, exhale, the world still hums. Somewhere, an old clock strikes the hour, and another story begins. And as you drift into sleep, remember this: no empire lasts forever, but one act of kindness, one patient repair, one refusal to hate, can keep ticking long after the flags have fallen. The mountains are silent now. The stars hang above them, indifferent and eternal. Somewhere, deep in the dark, time exhales. And for the first time in a century, it sounds like peace.